Aloha! This is Jason from Hawaii. Welcome to a special edition of the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. In this episode, I talked to John Siuntres of Word Balloon. Now let's get started. Today, I have a very special guest, John Siuntres from Word Balloon. John has been doing Word Balloon since 2005, and he, in his own words, is like one of the original Mercury astronauts, of the very early days of comic book / pop culture podcasting. I've been listening to Word Balloon for the last 10 years. To me, John is the gold standard of comic book podcast interviews. John, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, thanks for having me, Jason. I'm doing great. And honestly, I'm psyched to be on a podcast that originates from Hawaii. It's been a dream to go to Hawaii ever since I was a kid, watching the Brady Bunch go to Hawaii all the different TV shows that would cross over to Hawaii well before Magnum. And in fact, all right, now, because, there's enough, with that and Hawaii Five-0 and the new Magnum and stuff. It's like, all right, there's been a lot of Hawaiian production of late. But back in the day, was that like, oh, cool, man, they're doing shows about Hawaii? Or were you like, all right, here come the mainlanders, with their BS and everything. I have no idea. Is it a fun thing for you when it happens?
No, it is, because cool.
You
mentioned the Brady Bunch show. I'm gonna be because John, we're almost. I think you're 2 years older than me.
I'm 56.
I'm trying to remember if I saw that original Brady Bunch show when it was live. When they first aired it.
Yeah,
it was just so cool.
Sure.
Yeah, because we'd be like, oh, that's Waikiki Beach. Oh, it's so cool. Yeah.
Oh, God. I even remember a 70s game show called Diamond Head that was shot in Hawaii, and it would end with a person in a glass booth, and they would blow air in the booth, and they would shower them with bills, and they had to grab as many bills as they could. Yeah.
Wasn't that the one? No. Oh, God, that sounds familiar. Didn't they have Don Ho in there? I don't know. I don't
know. Don Ho was always on those shows, Chris and Brady's Bunch, and also he did that great ukulele duet with his buddy. And I remember this time I watched in reruns when I Dream. Jamie went to Hawaii, and she conjures King Kamehameha.
Oh yeah,
and everything. And I believe Michael Ansara, who played Kang, in Star Trek. I believe he was King, and also Barbara Eden's husband. I believe he was King Kamehameha. I could be wrong, but I know Don Ho was in that episode as well.
But it, and I mean, back then I think, Michael Ansara, he would have been perfect because he had because oh God, I can't remember what his nationality was, but he had that kind of that brownish dark skin where he could pass as a Hawaiian.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, he was Cochise in Broken Arrow, the old black and white Western. I mean, he always played people of color.
Yes.
And I believe maybe he's Lebanese or something like that. And yeah, man, I mean, again, this was back when literally Ricardo Montalban would squint and pretend to be Japanese. So there's I believe it's a Mission Impossible where Montalban is Japanese, and it's like, sure he is. Okay.
Yeah.
Or Hector Elizondo played an Eastern Asian on a Columbo. It wasn't Saudi Arabia, but it was of that culture. And forgive me of whether it was a Shia or a Sunni country. But yeah, I mean, and Sal Mineo, in fact, was the victim in that, and he also was from that country. Oh. So yeah, I mean, again, this is back in the day.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And again, it wasn't. I don't think it was done with any malice or anything like that. And it's good that now.
Yeah,
proper nationalities are playing their proper role.
Oh yes, and I'm sure back then they, because I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure because since TV shows are probably made so quickly back then, they had to okay, we got to get whoever,
Yeah, but you kind of figure, and especially, I'm assuming that Hawaiians obviously came to L.A. and were trying to be comedians or actors at the time and stuff like that. I mean, God, Cliff Nesteroff, one of my favorite comedy historians, just released a great book last year called "We Had a Slight Real Estate Problem," and it's all about the Native American comedians all through history, and really 20th century and stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's like, and also pointing out the fact that like a great comedian and great cultural icon, Will Rogers, was actually
Yes.
part Cherokee and everything. But no, it's great. And I mean, he really points out a bunch of the stand-ups from the 60s and 70s that I would have probably seen on Make Me Laugh or some of the variety shows. And I don't remember these guys. So it's really been a great education. And again, they got second-class treatment and stuff. Some of them leaned into it with their comedy.
Yeah.
Like that line, we had a slight reservation slight real estate problem. Was the title. So yeah, but yeah, always fascinating, and I'm glad that we're now aware of that, and more people of color and every diversity are getting their seat at the table, and it's rightfully so, especially in the nerd culture. Long time coming. We've always been very welcoming. I say that as a middle-aged white guy, but truly, all of us nerds. I mean, really, man, we're all excited. I mean, I just had the guys on who created Comic-Con on Saturday.
Yes.
And really, that communal culture, I really believe, has always been there. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry that there are those who are suddenly like, well, this is our show. And whether you disagree with them or agree with them politically or something, they're drawing lines in nerd culture. And that's such a tragedy, because it was never a problem. And a lot of my good friends, we may not agree politically, but we're all nerds, and it's like we all love this shit. Why can't we all just enjoy it? Sorry if I can't swear. I apologize.
No, yeah, it's okay. Don't worry.
I'm okay to swear.
Yeah, just don't
all right.
worry.
I probably will another couple times.
Don't worry. John, this is you. Don't worry, man.
All right, man. It's cool.
All right, yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry. So, where can listeners follow you? Like, if there's a new listener to the show,
Yeah, no, it's wordballoon.com. That's my main website. But the podcast is everywhere on all the podcast platforms. Mm-hmm. Since the pandemic, I really started to do more consistent video. So really for about the last year and a half, a lot of my shows start as Word Balloon Lives on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and then become the audio programs a day or two afterwards. And it's been great. So you can find me on YouTube under the Word Balloon channel. You can find me on Instagram under Word Balloon. At John Word Balloon is my Twitter handle. And I've got several Word Balloon pages on Facebook, and also my own personal page, John Siuntres.
Okay. All right. Now, for our listeners, I'll be talking to John. In this episode, I'll be talking to John about his love for comics, everything, nerd related, from Star Trek. I'm going to even talk, and I'm going to let him talk about his days in radio and as a sports writer who covered boxing, and also the early days of podcasting, and things in between, So, yeah. So, now I'm also going to point, for any new listeners or even longtime listeners, for more of John's rich history, please check out the 2-part Word Balloon 16th anniversary episode. Now that came out May 11th of this year, and it was hosted by Tom King. So so if you guys get a chance, please check that out. Let's see. Now if you are at home, please open that Cheerwine 6-pack soda 6-pack.
I love cherry wine, man. Oh. Good stuff. The best cherry cola there is, man.
That was for Mike Myers. Do you know Mike Myers, or have you heard of Mike Myers?
Tell me about. I mean, I'm assuming not Wayne's World Mike Myers. Tell me about Mike Myers.
Oh no, Mike Myers. Mike Myers, the podcaster from Colorado. From Colorado, he's been doing podcasts.
What's his show called?
He's got several. He's got like Mike's Weekly Reads, Geek Brunch.
Oh, I've heard of Geek Brunch. Sure.
Yeah, so he's one of the co-hosts on there. Yeah, he's been.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that's cool. No, and again, I hope I'm not disrespecting by not knowing that. But there are more comic book podcasts, and again, no disrespect to anyone who does it, than even movie review shows or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, literally, I remember more than 10 years ago talking to Chris Niesman from Around Comics and 11 O'Clock Comics. Can you believe how many? And that was 10 years ago. And it's like, so, you can imagine how many people now are doing it. I think it's great There's again more than enough room at the table for everybody.
Yes.
But that's good. That's good to know that Mike Myers is a cherry wine person, because I call it cherry wine. I don't know if it's just cheer wine. Probably is. There probably is no I or Y in there, but I always just call it cherry wine because and it's so seasonal here in Chicago, where we really only see it like in the summer, and it kind of creeps into the fall. But then, like, for like 6 months, my store doesn't stock it, or they don't stock enough of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, where the hell's all the cherry wine, man? I mean, it almost came back, it seems, in the last couple of years. Because like that and Green River were like old retro soda pops from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was like their last decades when I was a kid. And it seems like I hadn't seen it until like the recent 2000s, maybe like in the last 10 years or so. And one of my buddies, who we always talk about on the Yeah podcast, one of the podcasts I do with Art Baltazar and Franco, my buddy Chucky. And Chucky's a good buddy of mine. He's a UPS guy, and he's a big nerd too. And he loves cherry wine. So, half the time I'll buy like, a 6-pack of bottles and stuff and bring them over to Chucky's. And it's like, all right, let's sit down and watch a crappy movie together. Good man.
Green River, I have to say, we have that. We don't have cheer wine in Hawaii. Well, as far as I know.
Okay.
There could be something at some other local, smaller.
Sure. Yeah, some out of the way store. Yeah.
But for me, man, it's like, if I ever see it, I'm definitely posting that on Twitter,
Oh, but like, have you had it lately, or have people sent it to you, or because you online? I mean, God, I don't know what and good Lord, I don't know what the shipping cost is, but you can order it.
That's right. Yeah.
So
I never thought about that. Yeah.
When I would go to San Diego Comic-Con, and they, so it's at the convention center, and there, everybody talks about the Hyatt, and that's like the big hotel that a lot of the after-hour stuff happens at, but also the Hilton.
Yes.
And the Hilton even has panels going on that aren't at the convention center. A lot of TV stuff happens at the Hilton. But in the after hours, one of my first times, I really wanted iced tea. And they came with the Republic of Tea bottled, and I can't remember which flavor it was. But, I mean, I took a sip. There was no sugar added. Oh, God. And it had such a lovely floral taste to it. And I'm like, and it was just ice cold. And I'm like, this is the greatest iced tea I've ever had. And only certain specialty stores in Chicago I've been able to find it in the bottles, because you can't brew it like the way it's bottled and stuff. I mean, you try as much as you can. It's just not going to happen. And I'm a massive tea fan. And thankfully, being as fat as I am, I've weaned myself off of most sugar-based drinks.
Yes.
Chair wine is an exception.
Yes.
But it's usually a treat. I'll treat myself like every month or so. But I do. I love just good brewed iced tea, and have my palate has come to appreciate just the brewing of the tea, and I don't need any sugar in it or anything else in it, and it's fantastic. So.
All right. Okay.
So there's some BS for you at the beginning that has nothing to do with comics.
No, but this is great, because, like you said, it's a conversation. It's
Absolutely.
And just a little bit background information for our audience.
Sure.
I would just say I'll call John like my podcast friend. Or like almost.
Absolutely, man.
God, I can't. How many? 3 or 4
years
packages?
Good Lord, man! Seriously, like every year, you've been incredibly kind. And I mean, between the Kona coffee, all the macadamia nuts, all the great cookies and candy, it's an embarrassment of riches every year. Even the popcorn with the macadamia nuts in it. Seriously, man, thank you so much. Those are incredibly kind. And truly, it's a treat. And, you've gifted Art Baltazar over the years as well. And it's like, hey, did you get your Kona? And he's like, oh, yeah. So yeah, man, no, and we're coffee fiends. Okay. And hey, man, no, Hawaii, Kona coffee is the greatest coffee ever grown. No question.
I have to tell you, so just always be careful. Like, if you want the pure stuff, the 100% Kona coffee, remember it has to say 100%. If it only says 10%, it's just, they mix it in with something else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's no. I know it's like cocaine that's been stepped on. So yes. I hear. Yeah. I have no experience. I'll admit, I don't even know. I would assume Hawaii is a pot state. Is it a marijuana state?
Medical marijuana. It's just
only medical. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Because I would assume with the laid back culture and everything, But yeah, God, truly, when Illinois became legal, Chucky and I, are just like, man, we thought we would be in our 60s or 70s when it finally happened and be like, yay, but here we are. So we're very happy. We're very happy. We were happy before, but we're even happier now.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So also too, if you're a new listener, or like I said, a long time listener, if you are at work, if you're working in a warehouse setting or doing chores around the house, I hope we can entertain you for at least for the next couple of hours.
Absolutely.
God, man, it sounds like an Outer Limits opening, for the next hour,
That's right. We control the volume. Absolutely, man. No, and that's, hey, honestly, Jason, that's always the kindest compliment I get about Word Balloon is, like you said, I work in a warehouse. I'm painting houses all day, things like that. And it's like listening to your show is a great escape. Mm-hmm. And that's why I do long form on my show. And my shows sometimes will run 2 hours or more. Yeah. I mean, Tom King, Bendis, Rucka, Fraction, those guys, it's a long conversation. And also, having done this for 16 years, a lot of my guests have become friends.
Yes.
And that's been incredibly gratifying, and it means a lot. And they really are. And again, we all kind of help each other in the comics community. And especially once we become friends, and it's like, hey, what can I do to help you? And you'll learn that as we go on in our discussion.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And John, I'm going to say, those long form Word Balloon episodes, that has helped me get through my yard work, so.
Yeah. Thanks, man. No, that's awesome. Truly. I mean, that's a great compliment. And that's the beauty of podcasts, man. We're inside your head.
Yes.
Whether and that's kind of interesting. And I'm sure you've had this happen to you, Jason, when you've met listeners and stuff, and it's like, God, I feel like I know you because I'm listening to you all the time. And it's true. I try to imagine the listener as the third person in the conversation. Gene Siskel, the great film critic,
yes,
who I got to know a bit before he passed away because of my time in radio. He loved this one afternoon talk show, Steve Dahl and Gary Meyer. And they were very, very funny. And it was just a great conversational show. And he would say, when I'm driving around the city and listening to their show, it's like my two funniest friends are in the back seat having a conversation, and I'm driving around. And yeah, that's the vibe that I try to get with Word Balloon. I mean, that, and also another influence of mine for years, the various comic book interview magazines that were happening in the 80s and 90s. We just lost to COVID David Anthony Kraft, who did Comics Interview. And David had a rock and roll music background along with his comics and nerd culture background. And he would do these incredible issues. You should really look for them on eBay or in dollar bins at cons.
Yes.
These magazines are so great. Amazing Heroes, the Fantagraphics mainstream publication was another one. And it's fun talking to Wade and Kurt Busiek and people like that contributed to Amazing Heroes back in the 80s and 90s. Comics Journal, of course, comes to mind. Comics Journal was a little more the PBS of comic book publications. Nothing wrong with that. I'm a massive NPR and PBS fan. But yeah, that was kind of, all right, I better wear a suit because I'm going to be in the Comics Journal. Whereas I always felt Amazing Hero and Comics Interview was much more relaxed. But no, reading those were a massive influence to me on the way I wanted to conduct interviews, both in radio and also eventually here on the podcast platform.
Because I know what you're talking about, because I still have couple Amazing Heroes that I bought back in the 80s. One focused on the Watchmen.
Yeah, I have those, yep.
And then one focusing on, I think a few months after Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Sure, I remember that one. Yeah, man. No, it was as much a must buy for my pull box as any monthly issue, and also it would introduce me to titles and be like, oh, I never heard of Eternity Smith, which was like kind of a Rip Hunter time travel comic. And I'm like, I'd check that out. This art looks cool. And Mike Gustovich and the Justice Machine.
Oh,
and it's funny. Bendis was telling me that one of his earliest jobs in comics was being Mike's assistant. And Mike used to sell, as you likely remember, in the 70s and 80s, they would do portfolios and you could mail in and you'd get a bunch of prints of various characters. Like I have one that I bought recently. It's an old one, and it's Brent Anderson, the Astro City co-creator.
Yes.
And it's just him drawing Kazar. And it was like 12 prints of Kazar.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, because didn't he do a Kazar series back in the 80s?
I'm assuming he did. I didn't read that series necessarily.
Remember.
I have read Kazar off and on.
Yeah.
He probably did. And I would assume so, because that's probably why he was selling a portfolio that way. Yeah. But the guys who created the studio, Mike Kaluta, Jeff Jones, Barry Windsor Smith, and Swamp Thing, Bernie Wrightson. Yeah. They had a loft together in New York and started putting stuff out as the studio collectively. And one of their first big independent successes was doing a portfolio of fantasy sketches and drawings, paintings that they did, and it massively sold. And it really convinced them to leave comics on a regular basis and start working for the fantasy magazines and also doing paperback covers and the like. And it really is one of the great 80s creator success stories of, having success beyond DC and Marvel.
Yeah.
And other artists followed in their wake and, would license the characters through DC or Marvel, like Brent Anderson and Kazar. But, those are fun to find. And, if you're a comics art fan, you can't beat them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So sorry, John. So I'm going to continue on a little bit.
Tangents.
Sorry,
all
man.
Good.
Okay. So, all right. Now, before we started, well, we've already started. Before we start the interview, I want to thank a few podcasters that helped guide me and inspire me to do this. So, first off, I want to thank John Mayo of the Comic Book Page podcast and Drew of, Comics for Fun and Profit, for letting me contribute to their podcast. So thank you very much, guys. I also want to give a big shout out to Chris Marshall of the Collected Comics Library podcast. I know Chris has already, has spoken in the past about always bringing integrity when we do, to these comic book podcasts. So Chris, thank you very much. And for you, John, thank you, John. Thank you for inspiring me to do this. Thank you for inspiring me, to do these interviews. I've been doing these interviews off and on for the last 5 years, but more consistently in the last few months. So, John, again, thank you very much.
Oh, dude, my pleasure. I'm in good company. Those are several of my good comic book podcast friends that I've met over the years. And, Chris Marshall is one of those original podcasters, as you said in your introduction. I always call us I always think there are classes of podcasters, and I align them with astronauts.
Yes.
And, so I always say, well, my stock line, I just used it on Saturday when I was talking to the Comic-Con guys. I quote George Burns, the great comedian, who was talking about his old radio sitcom that he had, and with his wife, Gracie Allen, Burns and Allen. And he said, back in the 30s, we were all in the top 10. There were only 8 of us. And that's kind of the case with comic book podcasters, too.
Yes.
Because, Chris started a couple months before me. Augie DeBleek started a couple months before me from Pipeline and originally from Comic Book Resources. He continues to do Pipeline as a blog, but he was a great reviewer of comics back in the day, and certainly Chris. John Mayo and John, I think, came through on the Comic Geek Speak guys.
Yes.
And they started like 2 months before me. A lot of us, I think, were all inspired by the article that was in Wired magazine in February of 2005.
Yes.
And it was a big thing because podcasting was brand new. Adam Curry started in 2004. I mean, he's really the podfather. And I love that guy. I think he's a tremendous he was a great broadcaster. He worked at MTV. Yes. I mean, the guy's reputation and experience speaks for itself. But it was that, and then also I'll admit to, and with no hesitation, another great early comic book radio show out of Texas, Fanboy Radio, Scott Hines' show.
Oh,
and he was broadcasting from the Texas Christian University college radio station, but they were running their signal online, so you could hear them online. And that was one of my early inspirations because I was a big fan. He would get big guests and probably still does. I'll confess I haven't listened in a while. Sometimes I don't want to hear other people because I don't want to be influenced by their interviews, and I want to come to guests organically as much as I can. But Scott's show, I was listening and I'm like, oh, I would have asked this question. I would have asked that question. And I'm like, well, why not do it? And also, the inception of Word Balloon started as it was going to be a video documentary. A buddy of mine was a great videographer, and I saw him videotaping great creators at local shows. He did an incredible interview with Al Feldstein, one of the great EC and Mag Magazine founders. Really important to Bill Gaines, the creator of Mad and the creator of EC Comics and stuff. And I'm like, we should do that, and we should do a comic book documentary about Chicago-based either books or creators. And so we hit up Max Allan Collins because he had done the Dick Tracy comic strip and also the Road to Perdition graphic novels, which of course led to the Tom Hanks film. And we also talked to Brian Azzarello. He was in the midst of 100 Bullets. And Moonstone Books, a local comic and prose publisher who had a lot of great crime licenses at the time. They also had the Night Stalker, which I'm a massive fan of that 70s show, the Kolchak, the Night Stalker. And they were making comics and novels of Kolchak. So, yeah, good stuff, man. And really, they get great writers to do it and artists. And so anyway, that was we started making the video documentary. And John, my buddy videographer, he got busy with paying gigs. And I'm like, well, we're sitting on this stuff. And it had been, these interviews had been sitting for 4 months. And I'm like, I want to put them out now. So I started wordballoon.com. And and also at the time, the guy who created Comic Book Resources, and he sold it in the last few years. Shame on me that I don't remember his name. But he was doing the occasional MP3 interview on the CBR website, and he would he had Mike Hellboy.
Mike Mignola.
Mike Mignola, thank you, and Greg Rucka, and I think maybe Mark Wade as well. And I'm like, oh, I want to do that, and I'm going to start my own website. So I did that, and thankfully, the way to get word out back then, so many comic book people in back then, before MySpace and Facebook and Twitter and the like and stuff, they had websites and they had message boards, and some even had collected with message boards. Like Bendis had Jinx World, and Jinx World was Bendis and Mike Oeming and B. Clay Moore, and they're the three that come to mind right away. Fraction might have had a board over there, but then also there was Comic Block, and Comic Block was where Gail Simone and Jeff Johns and Rucka and Brubaker, they were all there. And so I'm like, all right, I started wordballoon.com May 10th, 2005. And I would go to the message boards and say, hey, you guys are obviously fans of Mark Waid. I just did this Mark Waid interview. Here's the link. So, and that's really what, started building my audience.
Oh, okay. That's great. I'm going to ask, like, for the, those early days in podcasting, because this is all before Skype.
Yes.
Like, what kind of equipment did you use? Especially, and then you guys, and back then, I think even, correct me if I'm wrong, like even back in 2011 when I started, you were doing telephone interviews, correct?
Correct. And there was, coming from broadcasting, there was a piece of equipment that was a good telephone interface where you could plug your phone line into it, plug your microphone into it, and the audio you would get back would be whomever you were calling. So yeah, for the longest time, I wish I could tell you the name of the thing. I wonder if it even still exists, given the simplicity of cloud technology and Skype and everything else. When CNN and a lot of the cable news divisions started using Skype video interviews, I was laughing because I'm like, look at where Skype is now.
Yeah.
And yeah, Skype was a wonderful, I mean, Jesus, to the point where long distance phone calls are a memory.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do them anymore. And God, I'm sure a million people that aren't podcasting and just are calling their parents via Skype or other friends and relatives and stuff. And yeah, and man, I'll tell you, I mean, again, what a ridiculous and unfortunate last year and a half things have been since COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But thank God we've got the technology.
Yes.
And I mean, my broadcast career goes back pre-faxing. I mean, faxes were a massive boom to us. I mean, they existed, but they weren't as prevalent as they had become in the 80s. So that was like a big step up and everything. And I remember even in the 90s when I was covering professional boxing in radio and stuff, and in the press room, some of the international guys hogging the fax machine to either receive stuff or get articles that they were doing sent out. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, it's going to take an hour to send the thing. You're an asshole. What the hell are you doing? We're busy. There's 20 people waiting in line for that thing. So, yeah, it was pretty funny.
That's why I'm kind of laughing, because back then it was like, how long did it take for one page to go through? It's not like nowadays where it's like you can have as long as you don't put more than 10, it'll just feed through so in seconds.
And who faxes these days compared to? I mean, I suppose businesses still do, but yeah, I mean, you attach a PDF to an email and you send it out, man. I mean, God, thank God for cloud technology. Honestly, another general, statement from me: the democratization of citizen media through podcasting and all of the wonderful software that these innovative people have come up with in the last 25 years has just been incredible.
Yes.
And truly, I am so in debt to those people. And, whenever I do get a chance to meet, I mean, I've never met Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban's the guy who invented streaming audio, and that's where he really, as much as we know him as, Shark Tank and all the various things that we know Mark Cuban about and all the sports teams, radio.com was really his baby that he created. And the only reason why he created it was, I forget what, he might have been in Texas at the time, but he missed Indiana University basketball, and he wanted a way to be able to listen to it. And the techie that he was, he came up with the streaming technology. And I mean, now, we almost take it for granted how easy it is. And I love, you'll forgive my schadenfreude about this, but especially, I don't hold anybody personally responsible for my radio career, if not ending, let's say at least being suspended for the last year and a half, because I got downsized because of COVID. Again, I understood. I mean, it's economics. And if you're not making advertising money, you can't pay people, and you're going to have to cut back. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But that said, I really love the fact that I've been podcasting for 16 years and all of the major media companies now really getting into podcasting and don't see it as a cute little thing, but see it as a necessity. And also the stuffed shirts that really have this thing figured out. Let me tell you how podcasting works. And even one of my former bosses, it was like, well, this is the way to do it. And I'm like, nothing. Because guess what? I've been doing it for 16 years. I know nothing. It is, nobody knows. Nobody knows what makes a great podcast other than great content and thankfully enough people finding out about it and sharing it with people. Yeah. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And beyond that, everything else is a crapshoot. And I mean, really, I kind of love them bumping their heads against the walls and also being tied down by their corporate structures. Yeah. And it's the tortoise and the hare. Only this time the hare wins, and I'm the hare. And even at 56, guess what? I'm faster than you knuckleheads. And I know how to juke and innovate and go, I got to use this now. Okay. And truly, I'm constantly learning. Yes. And younger podcasters are using applications of editing and video and the like that I'm like, how does that work? Well, I've never used that before. And both in audio and video. So it's a constant learning process,
Mhm.
which is great because, I'm a middle-aged white guy. And I, a lot of people are like, well, I'm setting my career and, starting to think about retirement. The hell with that. Are you
Yeah.
kidding me? This
Yeah.
has been like the greatest thing in the world
Mhm.
that I started doing 16 years ago. I have no intention of stopping.
Mhm.
And I constantly tell my friends in broadcasting, if they don't have a podcast, what are you waiting for? Take your audience with you. It's just like Robert Kirkman back in 2009 with the manifesto
Mhm.
that he made and said, leave DC and Marvel, keep your good ideas for yourself.
Mhm.
And God, I mean, look at the announcements that were made last week
Yes.
with all the Substack people, the
Yes.
creators that are going to Substack. Every time I think, well, all right, this is what the playing field looks like. Somebody new enters the field. There's a new way to put comics out there, and it just revives and refreshes the conversation and the possibilities for creators.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And the other thing too is that it also too is they can reach a wider audience because like I've always because in some interviews with I was talking to Michael W. Conrad and Noah Bailey because they released Double Walker on Comixology.
Okay.
So the thing is, James Tynion the Fourth,
Sure.
Scott Snyder, when they do Substack, they reach a wider audience because like someone on a small island in on Lanai in close to off the shores of Kauai.
Yes.
There's no comic book store, and if their store has, if their grocery store has comics, it's always going to be Batman, Spider-Man, or something, but nothing more. But now it's like if they have internet in their home, they're going to go, hey, what is this new thing from Scott Snyder? I've never seen this.
Yes. No, it's amazing, and you're right. I mean, really, and it's funny again, going back to my one of my recent episodes when I talked to Matthew Klickstein and Roger Friedman, who they made the podcast Comic-Con Begins, and it's all about the history of San Diego. For the longest time, sci-fi and nerd fandom was very local. Maybe you had a high school club or whatever. And now, thanks to the internet, my God, the amount of information you get, the awareness of any hobby or pursuit that you could find online really informs you in ways that God, as you said, comics at the grocery store. First place I used to buy comics was my pharmacy, my local pharmacy that was down the street from me. And it was actually one of my first paying jobs, Alpine Pharmacy. And they had a spinner rack. And they had a magazine section as well. And I remember buying Creepy and Eerie there as much as I would buy DC and Marvel books. And so that was my little bubble. And I had a couple friends that like comics as well. So like literally there's like 5 of us talking. That was it. Yeah. And now, good Lord, like you said, I mean, you could find out about indie books and not only name creators like James and Scott and people like that, obviously to John Hickman joining Substack, but also, it's like, someone will retweet an image from a creator that you've never heard of. And it's like, wait a minute, that looks really good. Yes. And you read the cell line and it's like, well, I like espionage stories. Yeah. And DC and Marvel really aren't doing that many espionage stories. I'd like to read more of them. Crime comics, romance, everything, every genre, and especially in the last 20 plus years or so, that genres are exploding again in a way that in prior decades, there were always 1 or 2 here and there. You had Preacher in the 90s, you had David Lapham and his crime comics, back in the 90s and stuff. But, I mean, the amount of interesting stuff in every genre. Horror has never had the time that it's currently having. And, I mean, God, again, I'm very fortunate being in Chicago and very deep comic stores like Chicago Comics and my buddies at Challengers Comics and my buddies at Yeah Comics in Skokie, suburban Chicago. They go deep in every genre. And, like, horror has its own section. Yeah. And that's amazing, as opposed to, House of Mystery and, what was Where Monsters Dwell for 2 70s examples of Marvel and DC. You might get 1 or 2, titles and stuff. And now it's, like I said, I mean, God, Vault and Aftershock and all these publishers, they'll do the occasional superhero thing, but their milieu really is all the other genres.
Yes.
Because they're smart and they're like, well, DC and Marvel kind of have that stuff sewed up.
Yeah.
And every now and then you'll get a good independent superhero comic. I don't know about you, Jason. I'll be honest. When creators come to me with their pitches, and I'll be honest, I'm kind of jaded where it's like, there's enough zombie books out there. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
There's enough vampire books out there. Thank you. It's really got to be special for me to take notice. And I will kind of, I mean, first of all, who the hell am I? But I mean, it's very flattering that a lot of people want to be on Word Balloon. But the reality is, too, it's a crowded field out there. That's good and bad.
Yes.
And it's tough to get the word out. I can only rely on my own personal taste of whether I want to talk to somebody or not.
Yes.
And, I mean, Ken Jansen's is doing a great book at Virus Comics for heavy metal. And, God, it's a time travel book, and shame on me. The title is escaping me right now. But it's a time travel book, and I'll be I'm a sucker for time travel books. Declan Shalvey has a really good image book right now about time travel, and I'm enjoying that as well. I think that's Time After Time.
Yes. Okay. Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm gonna. I feel bad. I should almost find Ken's book to give him the credit he deserves for his book. So I'll have it for you in a second.
Also, too, because the thing is that sounds pretty good. Now it's like, now you're getting me interested in Ken's book, because now I want to check that out.
Absolutely. 1 second. Where the hell is it? Is it Premonition? No. Hindsight. Thank you. Okay. Jesus. So yeah, Hindsight is the book, and yeah, it's cool. It's a cop chasing a scientist. And the scientist has gone back to the Jack the Ripper era. And that's another era where you could say, all right, we've had enough Jack the Ripper stories. What new things do you have to say about it? But I give Ken a lot of credit. He actually has come up with an interesting spin on the story. So, yeah, I mean, it's, thank God Westerns are back. I mean, it's, again, every geek, every geek genre, geek, maybe that's a new word for us. Every geek genre is really being explored, and that's fantastic. And then again, it is really a new golden age. These last 20 plus years have really been a new golden age.
Yes, and then the other thing too, like you said, is like, it's an honor that all these comic book creators, want to come up and come on your show to promote their book.
Oh yeah.
But I think also too, as you mentioned, like there's also a whole bunch of other podcasts. So if you're not available, they can, hey, maybe I can on this time, but I'll go to this podcast and because like you said, there's enough room at the table for everybody.
100%, man. And also it's really, and I believe this in terms of me gathering listeners, and I would assume this is the same for the comic creators. And I really feel a kinship with them as far as creating something and trying to build a following for it, build an audience. It's Johnny Appleseed. It's one at a time. I mean, that's the Johnny Appleseed legend, that he was planting apple tree seeds one at a time and hoping they grow. And, that's the way the folklore went. And I really believe in that. And I mean, again, starting in 2005, when I got my first 50 listeners on an episode, I was thrilled. The big leap forward was Brian Bendis. I started in May of 2005. And by August of 2005, I had done enough interviews where I made a data CD filled with MP3 files and started handing them out to my favorite creators. And I'm like, and thankfully, at that point, because I started in 2005, I had been in Chicago radio. It's funny because, like I said, it's my 16th anniversary is for Word Balloon. At that point, I had been in Chicago radio for 15 years, starting in 1990. So I was comfortable conducting interviews. I spent a long time in Chicago sports radio. And believe me, I had my, if you know your Saturday Night Live, I had my Chris Farley show interviews. Remember that thing you did? That was awesome, And sometimes I can't even help it. But even now, when I'll have a celebrity on and be like, I got to tell you, this moment was fantastic. And I don't know, that was awesome. But, it is in my mind, like, damn it, I'm doing a Chris Farley. Stop it. You're better than that. But no, I had the confidence in these initial Word Balloon episodes to hand out these data CDs, and I had one to Rucka and Brubaker and Brian Bendis, Gail Simone,
Yes.
a lot of these people, and that kind of bore fruit. And Rucka is like, I'm going to listen to this when I get back on the plane. I don't think he actually could because it was a data MP3 CD. But even just saying that, and no, that really helped. And again, I would go to their message boards and say, hey, I do this. Yes. Or they would have their email contacts back then. And it's like, this is what I do. I'd love to have you on the show.
Yeah.
And I would put in there, oh, by the way, I've been working for CBS Radio, doing sports interviews and things like that. And not necessarily to entice them with the sports angle, but CBS, it's like, all right, there's some cachet to CBS, obviously. Yeah. And, having worked at, I mean, they were all local radio stations and television stations. But yeah, man, that's where I really kind of developed my style and got comfortable. And especially in sports talk radio, because we all start off wanting to be Walter Cronkite or Edward R. Murrow, very straight and very, you got to do it this way. And then sports talk, especially the way it organically grew in the major cities. And I mean, New York was first, but Chicago was pretty early. I mean, it was 1992 when my station started The Score. And I got on within the first 4 months of them being formed. And a lot of our guys were just local fans. And especially, just like you'll hear a great New York accent, you'll hear a great Chicago accent, like, hey, I'm talking to Michael Jordan. So, Michael, let me tell you about the last game. All right? I didn't understand why you threw to Scotty. Horace is standing there right by the basket. What the hell happened? And I mean, and it's that kind of, hanging out of your ass, kind of straight from the hip shooting, street talk. And it's like, I like that. And it's like, once I get comfortable with somebody, and especially first timers, that initial 10 minutes, then everybody loosens up, and it's like, all right, hey, we're just talking. Yeah. And then luckily I can start off with, hey, we're just talking, in that kind of attitude. And also, unlike sports talk radio, that can get very combative. A word to the wise that might be other podcasters that are just getting started and doing guest interviews. These people are your guests. And that's the operative word, guest. You wouldn't invite somebody into your living room and sit them down and go, hey, you know why you suck? Let me tell you what I didn't like about Infinite Frontier. Joshua Williamson. I really hated X, Y, and Z. And, man, I can't tell you how many podcasts I've listened to over the years where these hosts are putting their foot in their mouths in terms of doing that. And it's like, who the hell are you? Yes. And B, it's okay to disagree with something. Find a polite way and an articulate way to say, wow, that didn't seem to resonate with fans. Why? I remember and I felt so bad because we were friends by this point, and I had Matt Fraction on when he had done the Fear Itself event for Marvel. Oh, yes. And that kind of ended with a thud. Yeah. And it was kind of overcommitted and stuff. Oh, yeah. And I'm like, Matt, what happened? And that's all I mean, and it was, people had kind of spoken their piece about it. And I felt like I just spanked Matt because Matt was so, I don't even know what the right word would be, but just kind of, kind of embarrassed by the thing. And it's like, oh, man, that's the last thing I want to do. I'm asking from an intellectual standpoint because here's the bottom line. All of these people, even the stuff like new Star Trek that I hate with a passion, these people are not setting out to making lousy content. They are trying very hard, and in their minds, they're making the best thing that they can make at that moment. Whether the inhibitors are deadlines or a network saying, no, you can't do that, you got to rewrite it, whatever it is, there is more than one reason. And I'm not looking for dirt. I'm saying as part of the creative process, which I try to examine in my conversations as well, okay, that was a misfire. Can you step back and think of what maybe happened wrong? That's where I'm coming from. So again, it's like, it's okay to disagree, but be tactful with your disagreement. And don't be like, yeah, I don't know what you were thinking because, Superman would never act that way. Or, good Lord, I saw Chuck Austin get his ass handed to him. I'm waiting in line for a Darwin Cook sketch. Back in one of the early Wizard shows. And Darwin and Chuck are sitting next to each other in Artist Alley. Darwin's doing all these amazing sketches and stuff, and I'm in line. And I see this guy and his girlfriend go up to Chuck Austin. And it's like, hi. Oh, hey, how you doing? So you write the X-Men? Yeah, yeah. Boy, you write the Juggernaut a lot. Yeah, I do. He's one of my favorite characters. Well, I got to tell you, man, you know nothing about the Juggernaut because I can't disagree more with what you're doing in the book. And all of a sudden, the girlfriend's like, yeah, you're right. He's right. You really don't know the Juggernaut. And he's like, well, I guess we can disagree. Oh, no. I've been buying this book for years. You've just been writing it for over a year. You don't know what you're doing. And they walk away very smug. And I'm just like, and Darwin can't help but hear this stuff because he's right next to him. And he's like, I cannot believe what just happened. I'm so sorry. And all of us were in line and just shaking it. And we're like, yeah, man, that's terrible. I got out of line for Darwin's line to get a sketch. I never got a Darwin Cook sketch. That was my only opportunity to get one. Shame on me. But I felt so bad for Chuck. And I'm like, Chuck, you used to draw Miracle Man, didn't you? And he's like, well, yeah. And I said, draw me a Miracle Man sketch. And he did. And I still have it, and it's one of my favorite pieces that I have. And I've had Chuck on the show. I had him. This was before I was podcasting, I believe, because it was when New Frontier was coming out. Mm-hmm. And again, thank God for cons, because just like any other fan, you could walk up to Darwin and say, "God, I'm loving New Frontier." Mm-hmm. And a few months earlier, I told him that at a different convention. And he was great because he opened up and he goes, yeah, but he goes, do you like it, in the magazine floppy format? Mm-hmm. He goes, I was really a bear. And I'm like, hey, I want this thing no more expensive than Dark Knight Returns was, 15 years ago or whatever. Mm-hmm. You better make it that price point in DC. And they're like, well, the only way we can do that is make it a floppy. So Darwin was just beside himself. And I'm like, well, they're going to collect it, man. I'm like, your art's too good. I mean, it's a beautiful story. I'm like, I get it, though. So Darwin was amazing, and I got to know Darwin before he passed away. Never came on Word Balloon, unfortunately, but I treasure the times that we hung out and had great conversations. He was a sweetheart of a guy, and it really, when I think of him, it upsets me that he's still not around because he was tremendous, and we need him. We really need him. But yeah, man, I really felt for Chuck. And subsequently, he's been on like Word Balloon 2 or 3 times. Mm-hmm. He was even on last year because he had a new sci-fi book. That's really cool.
Yes, I remember that interview, last year's interview, because I think you guys talked about that story. It was like, when I heard it, I was like, oh my God, I cannot.
Well, had you heard enough? And it was at the same. It was at the Wizard Chicago show that this happened, and then years later, this. Can I swear a little?
Yeah, yes.
All right, fine. Because this asshole and his buddy, this asshole walks up to Rob Liefeld's table. His asshole buddy is videotaping it on his phone.
Oh, God.
And he hands him a How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way book to Rob Liefeld and goes, here, you need this more than I do. And it's like, it was awesome because he posted it thinking, hey, man, I really got Rob Liefeld. And honestly, there's a little hyperbole here, but pretty much the entire comic creator community and every good fan is like, hey, fuck you. You're an asshole. Rob doesn't need your bullshit. And by the way, he doesn't need your approval either. Yeah. And truly, I never talked to Rob about it on the pods because I know it bumped. I mean, truly, it was so sad. I saw it happen. I had already planned on talking to Rob about booking him again because he had already been on Word Balloon a couple times in the past. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hey, man, first of all, I heard what happened. That's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I said, and that you're always welcome back on Word Balloon. In fact, Rob, identified me by my voice at my first San Diego, where it was after hours at the Hyatt. And I can't even remember who I was talking to, but he's sitting with Jeff Loeb, and he goes, hey, you're the voice. And I'm like, pardon me? He goes, Word Balloon. I'm like, yeah. He's like, Rob Liefeld. I'm like, yeah. And, and I had already had Jeff on. Jeff's smiling and laughing. And he's like, I love your show. And I'm like, well, that's fucking amazing.
Yes.
Because I really respect you and what you've done. And you're welcome on my show anytime. And I'm always happy when he comes back. He came back early on during the pandemic, and we had an amazing conversation. And people were even shitting on him there. And again, back to my, this is my guest. I really had to kind of yell at the chat of the people that were being jerks. And it's like, look, I understand. Rob has put out some Kickstarters, in fairness, that he hasn't fulfilled yet. And I understand that. and I'm saying that now in this independent show. But while he's on my show, it's like, this is my guest.
Yes.
And Rob is here because we're friends.
Yes.
And I'm really sorry for whatever problems you have with Rob, but you're not going to air him here. You're not going to air those problems here.
Yeah.
And that's a choice, because I do think it's fair in an open forum at a convention, or as I do open things up to questions and comments,
Yes.
that if it were completely just the room being the room, that it's fair to ask him about this stuff in a polite way.
Yeah.
First of all, they weren't polite, but secondly, we used to get this on sports radio too, where fans would call all hot, and I have the microphone now, so you must listen to me. And it's like, no, we have the volume control on the microphone, and we literally would fade them down. So I really think that the Cubs suck, and this is what, and it was like fantastic. And it's like, and he's gone. Let's move to the next caller. And they'd call up, so you can't do that. And it's like, of course we can. It's our radio station. Word Balloon is my platform. So again, I will every now and then I will ask a pointed question, but I will try and do it in as fair a way as possible. And truly, unfortunately, I think as great as the internet has been, there's also the downside of that, where jerks feel very free to be anonymous with their complaints. Yeah. And I always tell some of my creators that get bummed out about these guys, I'm like, you are not going to win an argument with Darth Vader 28.
Yeah.
I don't know how to break, because nobody knows who the hell Darth Vader 28 is. I go, it could be a 12-year-old kid. Yeah. It could be a person who has troubles, let's say, from an intellectual or emotional standpoint. Just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. But yeah.
Anyway.
And the thing is too, it's like, because the other thing that I've also, John, it's like when I interview creators is I always remind myself that they are my guest, and that's why I always, my format is always send them the questions first to look for them to look over, because I don't want to ask a question during the interview and they're like, and then there's that
dead air,
or that uncomfortable moment,
sure.
But it's like, for me, it's like they're my guests and I want them to promote their stuff,
right? And again, it's you're having them on because you like what they make.
Yes,
it's that basic. I don't do reviews on my show. My arbitration is, I like your book or I like what you've made, I want to talk to you. Yeah. And sometimes there are people that come out of the blue and it's like, hey, can you check out my comic? Fine. Don't send me the ad package that just has a splash page or whatever. It's like, if you've got a book, send me the book. Let me read the book. And sometimes it's fine. Sometimes I'm tough, I guess, and I'm like, not enjoying your art. That's a big problem, because that's 80% of what we take in when we read a comic.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who am I? But I'm like, in my opinion, I'd like to see you maybe work on other books and maybe build your portfolio a bit. Yeah. And please contact me when you have new stuff, but I'm not feeling it for your current book. Sorry.
Yeah. No, yeah. And they're just being.
And again, luckily, like you said, there are other podcasts.
Yes.
That's great. And I'm thrilled. And God, Kevin Mellon and Dennis Hopeless, I can't even remember the name of their book, but when they first approached me, I had no interest in it. And they ended up getting a development deal from it. Kevin has since moved to animation. He's with the guys that do all those Adult Swim cartoons.
Oh, okay.
Ghost Street, and I forget the other name of the and also he was working on FX. Not Hunter, the Secret Agent cartoon.
Archer?
Archer. Thank you.
Oh, see, no, yeah.
I'm sorry, man. My brain sucks today.
No.
I went and saw Green Day, Fall Out Boy, and Weezer last night at Wrigley Field.
It was amazing.
It was amazing.
Picture.
I know. All of a sudden you could, I'm sure everybody was tweeting out photos and stuff. And so I stopped. Later today, I'll post all the other video and photos I took. And it was funny. Mike Norton was blowing me garbage. Like, yeah, get away, old man. You shouldn't be there. And it's like, I got news for you, pal. I was in rock radio when Green Day and Weezer broke through. So they are of my era. So relax. I don't know how to break it to you, but I'm an industry person. And I rarely do that. And I know Mike was just teasing. I love Mike's Mike's like a brother to me.
Yeah.
But but it's like just so you know, because I'm sure a lot of people are like, hey, you're like 56. What are you doing at that show? And it's like, well, Green Day's like 30 years old.
Yeah,
So I was 26 when I discovered Green Day. You know, and Weezer, fine. I was in my early 30s, but still, I'm like, yeah, no, sorry. I'm like, yeah, these guys are my. I mean, I remember Janine Garofalo making a Weezer joke on a Larry Sanders episode, and that was, you know, back in the late 90s.
Yes.
Stuff. And it's so, yeah, I'm like, you know, she's like, I just want to date somebody from Weezer, and you know, it's stuff like that, and it's like, yeah. So no, I mean, you know, back, you know, but I mean, I'll admit, in the last 20 years, there are less and less bands that I really give a damn about.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, and even Fall Out Boy. Fall Out Boy's from my hometown, Wilmette, Illinois,
okay.
suburban Chicago. So no, I love Fall Out Boy. But yeah, I'm like, I mean, I definitely will feel like an old man at certain concerts. But no, I'm like Green Day. I've never seen Green Day live. I'm like, thank God.
Yes.
And same with Weezer. And it was great being at Wrigley Field, the Coach Ballpark. And the last concert I saw there was a few years ago when the Police were on their farewell tour.
Wow.
And that was the third time I saw the Police. I saw the Police in the early 80s when the Ghost in the Machine album had debuted and the Go-Go's opened up for them.
Oh, my God.
And were adorable. Thank you.
Hey,
Not knowing their hardcore rock and roll lifestyle that they were doing backstage. But we just thought, aren't they cute little beboppers and stuff? And it's like, yeah, guess what, kid? I'm living the rock and roll experience more than you ever will. And it's like, okay. Yes, Miss Carlisle.
Yeah. So did you watch there's that Go-Go's documentary that came out
it's amazing. It's so good.
Watch that.
You know, I mean, honestly, my broadcast career, the intent was to get into music radio.
Okay.
And I was very fortunate because our suburban Chicago high school, New Trier, is one of it's a very prestigious high school and a lot of money there. A lot of broadcast people from Chicago lived in the towns that their high school was New Trier. So we had a lot of broadcast equipment, and we had a TV station in the 70s and a radio station in the 70s. And I went to work for them in the early 80s. So I was really geared towards broadcasting and music radio. That was going to be my ambition.
Oh, okay.
And then I went to Illinois State University.
Okay.
And I was the program director of my college music station there.
Yes.
And I came out of my sophomore year. So I was convinced music was going to be my career. So I was very much in tune with bands that were breaking from my high school years, really up until the early 2000s when I started working for Sporting News Radio, and my main focus was sports. I mean, during a 10-year period, I worked at WXRT, which is one of the big rock stations still there in Chicago, and The Score, WSCR. And I started working for both of them in 1992 and ended my association with them in 2001. And it was a great 9 years. And it was like living in a Love Boat or Monkeys episode, because literally it was like, oh, hi, Elvis Costello. Nice to see you. Oh, you're going to sing a song for us. Great. Oh, hi, John Hyatt. Hi, Sean Colvin and the Replacements. And I mean, my God, Boz Scaggs and John Fogerty and Tina Turner. The Buddy Guy is a local Chicago guy and would come and bring food because he just knew everybody at the rock station. It's like, hey, Buddy Guy's bringing lunch. Yay. And it was, you know, fantastic. And he'd have chafing dishes. Oh, yeah, I made this myself. Absolutely. Have some, John. I'm like, thank you, Grammy Award-winning Buddy Guy, one of the greatest blues guitarists ever. So nice to meet you and know you. And the best was the Staples Singers, who were a great soul band. I'll Take You There is one of their big early 70s songs. And Respect Yourself. And Mavis is still with us, thank God, and is one of the great R&B icons. But her dad, Pops, was also in the band. And one time in the 90s, they lived on the south side of Chicago, and the radio station WXRT and The Score, we were on the north side. And they came in, they did this. I mean, one of our DJs at XRT had a great weekly show called Blues Breakers, and he had all the great blues legends, and still to this day, well respected in the blues communities and stuff. And so he has this great sit-down interview with Mavis and Pops. And Pops is, you know, in his 70s at this point, and Mavis, I forget how old. Again, this is like 25 years ago. And they're leaving, and the programmer is like, Mavis, please let us order you a town car. It is no problem. And she's like, shut up, Norm. We're from Chicago. We ride the bus. And I mean, it was going to be like a 2-hour CTA bus from this, the north side of the city to the south side and stops all along the way. And it's like, Mavis, what are you doing? We're happy to do this for you. We love you. And it's like, no, we're all neighborhood people. I mean, and Billy Corrigan was like that from Smashing Pumpkins. He would just show up. And it's just like, this is insane. And truly, like, or I did breakfast broadcast for the morning show of the rock station. And I'm sitting next to John Hyatt, and he's tuning in his guitar. And he's like, how's that sound? I'm like, how the hell do I know? Or Ray Davies from the Kinks came, and we did a comedy bit together. We did like a little sketch that had a bunch of characters, and I was in a sketch with Ray Davies. So I can, smile and say, all right, that was cool. And same with the score. I got to swap jokes with Don Rickles. I got to swap jokes with Shecky Green.
Oh, my God.
I met Frankie Avalon, and we talked about the Beach movies. I mean, it just like all these great, like, little or my best nerd crossing over to comics moment, Charlie Callis, the old comedian, who, if you ever see those Legends of the Superheroes, terrible NBC specials that they made, he was Sinestro. And if you ever saw Charlie Callis, he looks like a Gil Kane drawing of Sinestro. Okay. And so I told him, and again, I mean, the guy had a massive career, films with Jerry Lewis, lots of television, lots of variety shows, a million Tonight shows, and he was in town doing live stand-up, and he had a handler with him, a younger guy. And I go, Charlie, I got to tell you, I love your comedy. You're very funny, but you will always be Sinestro to me. And his bulging eyes got that much bigger. And he's like, okay, check that off the list. He goes, there's always at least one of you in every city. And this is back in like the mid-'90s. He goes, that remembers, because it was 20 years ago that he had done that show. And he's like, that remembers that show and tells me how much I really look like Sinestro. I'm like, you didn't need makeup, man. He goes, they barely put any on me. They colored my face. That's all they did. I'm like, I get it. You look like Sinestro. It's insane. So, yeah, it was that, stuff like that. And, yeah, man, so that was like 9 years. And that was really one of my first big radio jobs in Chicago. And I was so spoiled. And I mean, Jesus, and mentioning the concert last night, Green Day, Weezer, and Fall Out Boy, we would be like, we could be on the guest list of pretty much any show we wanted to be on because we were from the radio station. And all the record companies and the concert promoters, they respected us. Yeah. So that was kind of cool.
That is awesome. 2 questions. First off, I know you, correct me if I'm wrong, you went to Illinois State. What was your major in?
Well, and honestly, it was communications, and what a BS major. Well, and no disrespect to anyone listening or yourself if you have a communications major, but when I tell people I want to get into broadcasting, I'm like, all right, first of all, you don't need a journalism major. You don't need a communications major. You don't. I mean, I did have good teachers. Yes. And especially my one good friend who was also a teacher. Her name is Deborah Lesser, and she was she was the sponsor of the radio station as well as teaching several broadcast production classes and stuff. And she is still a good friend and mentor to me. Yes. And I seek her advice and check in with her every so often to say this. I mean, we talk all the time, but just in terms of career, every now and then it'll be like, I'm thinking this. I really want to know what you think, because thankfully, even though she spent the majority of her time in academics, she still has her finger on the pulse of what's happening. Yeah. So she gets it in a way that a lot of people don't, including my own family. I mean, I love my family, obviously, and I've got one of those classic big fat Greek families like in the movies and stuff. They're totally like that, totally in your life, every aspect. And while they really are great cheerleaders for what I've done in my broadcast career, they really didn't understand it beyond, wow, John's on the radio. And it's like, yeah, John's on the radio, but I'm not, a major star. I'm a reporter. I'm a sidekick. No, John's on the radio. And now John's on TV. And it's like, well, that's really nice. That's great. And they're awesome that way. Yeah. But yeah, unfortunately, very few people in my family really I could sit down with and say, yeah, I'm thinking X or Y. But thankfully, again, having been in Chicago broadcasting for 30 years, literally, I still have good friends that I worked with that always were kind of mentors to me, and I do bounce off ideas with them. And by the same token, like I told them, I'm like, you guys got to start podcasting. Yeah. This is amazing. And I was telling them this 15 years ago.
Yes.
And they're like, whatever. Now, some of them are actually doing it after they've retired from broadcasting themselves. They're 10 years older than me. So they're in their mid-60s and stuff. And they're like, yeah, I'm trying it. I kind of like it. I'm like, of course you like it. Yeah. It's radio without any of the rules. You do whatever the hell you want. Yeah. You can do a half-hour show. You can do a 10-minute show. You can do a 3-hour show. It doesn't matter.
And the other thing, too, is that, I mean, you know, there's podcasting for almost anything. And I'm not trying to be sarcastic or anything, but I mean, someone who wants to talk about sewing or not being sarcastic.
Not at all. I've said the same thing. Good friend of mine who sadly passed away young, my friend Megan Reed, she was totally into needlepoint. And she's like, John, I've discovered needlepoint video and audio podcasts. I'm like, yeah, I know. And in fact, Jason, one of the new shows, and I know you're aware of it, that we just started a few weeks ago, Gabe Hartman and myself, we started Kinescope. Yes. And it's a look at the early days of live television. And I mean, again, being a broadcast nerd, Gabe's the one who suggested it, and he's like, "Would you want to do that?" I'm like, "Are you kidding? I'm a nerd when it comes to the broadcast industry, and I mean, these are the growing and learning days of television in America." Yeah. So I'm like, of course, and I was so shocked to go. I mean, here's an interesting secret that most of the nerd culture doesn't care about, but I really searched high and low for any sort of live television review podcast like we're doing. I couldn't find any. Yeah. So I'm like, in 2021, and the fact that podcasting has been around for 17 years, for there not to be a podcast about live television the way there are about movies and TV and rewatches of, episode by episode of Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch and the West Wing and any current show you can imagine. BuzzFeed has an entire network of every nerd show. They've got a episode review show of everything. I'm like, I can't believe someone has not tackled this, because not only is the period fascinating, all of the actors, like Steve McQueen, this was among his first jobs. Jack Lemmon. Yes. James Dean, we just did an episode. James Dean only made 3 major movies, but he made a couple dozen live TV shows. And it is fascinating watching these building block steps in their careers before they became big. And that also goes for screenwriters and directors and producers, because like some of the biggest names in film history, like Sidney Lumet and John Frankenheimer, were television directors before they were movie directors. George Roy Hill, who made The Sting and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. All these people cut their teeth on TV. And writers like Paddy Chayefsky, and of course the great Rod Serling. I mean, my God, Rod Serling had almost 10 years of teleplays that weren't science fiction before he did The Twilight Zone. So there's that fantastic, and it's on YouTube, interview that he made on Mike Wallace's pre-60 Minutes interview show from 1958 or 59, before The Twilight Zone premiered. And he's like, so what are you doing in sci-fi? You're a prestige teleplaywright of Emmy-winning important stories. Why sci-fi and fantasy? And Rod is very like, well, you don't understand. Actually, I think sci-fi and fantasy can be sophisticated and premiere. And it's such a great early response for someone that was respected by the mainstream. And like, I don't know how to break it to you, but there is intelligent writing happening in these circles of science fiction and fantasy. That's another thing. I keep promoting this Comic-Con Begins because it's fresh in my mind. If you haven't heard it, Jason, it is so good. And it's six episodes of just the granular evolution of the Comic-Con. And there are so many great moments. They have Ray Bradbury in the early 70s letting the crowd know how great Mad Magazine is. And they're like, you know what the most important magazine on the stands is today? Mad, because they've got the guts to take on all of the big industries and, advertising and the corporate structure and make fun of it in a way that nobody else has the guts to do it. And that was true, man, especially back then. And I always say Mad Magazine was the Daily Show of its day. Yeah. It really was. And especially when you go back to the 50s and 60s, even more so. But so anyway, but I love stuff, and it's so great. And that was one of the great things in the 2000s when Samuel L. Jackson is like, I read comics. I think they're great. Patrick Stewart. I would love to be Spider Jerusalem if they ever do a Transmetropolitan movie. And it's like these important people in film, Ben Affleck, Kevin Smith, all these people are like, no, I'm a comic book fan because this stuff is good.
Yes.
And so honestly, we won at the end of the day. The geeks won. I mean, I was working at one of my radio stations 5 years ago, and a couple of the secretaries are like, hey, you're into comics, yeah? And they're like, okay, we really have gotten into Gotham and The Flash. And one goes, can you explain Professor Zoom and Reverse Flash to me? And I'm like, sit down.
Yeah.
I'd be glad to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's like, no, we won, man. We won.
Because I remember going back to, when the X-Men movie came out,
99, yeah.
Yeah, they got Patrick Stewart,
yeah,
Kellen, and they added the gravitas to X-Men. I was like, oh my God, because I'm going to say, because, like you've mentioned, for us, older nerds, we had to sit through, remember this one, Kathy Lee Crosby's Wonder Woman.
Of course I do. Back to Montalban. Montalban is the bad guy. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was it, the 1978 Doctor Strange movie.
Yep, all those Marvel movies. Yeah, man. No. Reb Brown. God, I finally met Reb Brown in 2019 at a Terrificon in Connecticut, and he hugged me. Because I'm like, hey, man, listen. I go, first of all, obviously the first costume, he goes, believe me, I know. I see in the first movie. Thankfully, the second movie, they got the costume right. I go, but seriously, I wish the scripts were stronger because you were perfect casting as Steve Rogers. Because unlike what they had to do to make obviously Chris Evans pumped up and everything, but and that origin scene in First Avenger is so amazing, and also the way they with CG were able to skinny him and nerd him down. Reb looked like, especially when he was young, and still does, like he's got that body. He's tall. He's totally a muscle man. And it's like, no, I believed you as Steve Rogers. And also was enough of an actor to be ordinary guy Steve Rogers, despite suddenly being juiced up and everything. And he hugged me. And I'm like, no, man, it's cool. I'm happy to tell you. I'm like, you're great. So no, and I mean, now I'm Dana Carvey with the old man he used to do on SNL. And we loved it. When those movies came out, it's like, oh my God, there's a Doctor Strange movie. Or the 5 seasons of the Hulk. Oh my God, the Hulk was a triumph. It's a great show.
Yeah.
And that music, that haunting piano theme. Good Lord. And when they in the final TV movie, The Death of the Incredible Hulk, when the girl's like, David, I'm so sorry. He's like, no, it's okay. I'm free. And they play the Lonely Man theme, and you're like, oh man, he's dead, but that's beautiful. He's free. It's okay. So yeah, man, it's stuff like that. We love that shit. Now finally, with the start of, I'll go back to Blade. I think Blade, the Wesley Snipes Blade, was the beginning of the modern comic book movie era. And it's even fair to say that there was a period from 97 to Iron Man, that those 9 years, that things leapt ahead as well. But I think the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies hold up. I certainly think the Nolan Batman movies are exceptional.
Yes.
But yeah, I would say it would start with Blade. It's that great moment in Rocky Balboa, the last Rocky movie before Creed, when Rocky in his 50s is fighting Mason Dixon or whatever, and his kid's in the corner, and he's like, listen to them. They all thought this was a joke. Nobody's laughing anymore. And it's like, yeah, that's how I feel about the nerd stuff. And in fact, that idiot executive I was telling you about, I understand how podcasts going. He would roll his eyes while I was talking to these secretaries and stuff. And it's like, hey, jerk off, bad news. You know what the biggest, most successful movies have been ever? Marvel movies.
Yes.
F you. F you and your I know everything. You know dick. So go back to your little office and try to figure out your little radio career while the rest of us are evolving with the culture and making cool content and handing you your lunch. That's where radio is right now. And honestly, if I get another radio job, that's great.
Yes.
But I am truly, and there's something possibly in the works. I'm very cynical of, you got to prove yourself to me as much as I have to prove myself to you, because I don't need to be jerked around.
Yes. Yeah, because you've been in the radio broadcasting business.
Well, and truly, thankfully, and I mean this, because of people like yourself and the patrons and my paying sponsors, as far as companies and stuff, I'm able to stay in my apartment. I'm able to pay my bills, and I am incredibly grateful for that. And I can't thank you and other patrons enough for that support. And I don't count on that. I keep trying to evolve the business and keep trying to bring in outside money, so I don't have to rely on patrons. But it really is a great validation of what I'm doing, rather than broadcasting right now, seeing the outside value of podcasting. But again, they think they know how to do it, and it's like, you don't know nothing. You don't know a goddamn thing. So just sit back and let me hear your ideas as much as you want to hear mine, because I'm not convinced. Because they've been doing it wrong for a really long time. It's a different company. But I still, seeing what they've done in the past, it's like, yeah, that's great. Beyond repurposing your radio product, what other ideas do you have? Yeah. Anyway.
So, for listeners, if you've been a long time listener to Word Balloon, if you just started listening to Word Balloon like within the last week, I'm part of the League of Word Balloon listeners. I
appreciate that, man.
No problem. And John, I know even some of your some of the creators, like I think Brian Meltzer posted on Twitter that he's been a Patreon for so long time.
Brad, that was amazing, because really Brad and I both found each other when he was trying to establish his comic book cred, even though he was a longtime reader and went to school with, I believe he and Johns went to school together and they were college friends. And again, I came to him. I mean, just like everybody, when he followed Kevin Smith on Green Arrow, it's like, all right, let's see what this guy's got. And it was amazing. So I met him at a New York convention, and I'm like, hey, you got to come on the show. And then I started reading his novels. And then my sister is not a nerd in any way, but she does like exciting thrillers. And she, on her own, started reading Brad's novels. And at this point, I had known Brad for a couple of years, and he was coming to town for a book signing near where she lived. And I said, hey, Brad's coming to town. We should go and say hello to him. And I said, he'll sign your book and everything. And I said, I'm friends with him. So Brad is autographing books. He sees me. He gets up from the table, comes in line and hugs me. And later, and so then he gushes to my sister and he gushes to me, and he was incredibly great to me. And she's like, your brother has the best comic book podcast. That's like, forgive me, the tallest little person. It's like, that's great. Whatever that means to most people. And especially this is like in 2009, 2010, whatever. And we're driving home. She's like, oh my God, you really are friends with him. And I'm like, yeah, I told you. And unfortunately, it's kind of been, and again, that's why, like, my family doesn't quite get what I do. Because, some of them do. And some of them are like, hey, I saw you on the Discovery Channel. You were on Prophets of Science Fiction. That was amazing. And my sister's like, what? I told you about that. I did this TV show. I don't know if I'll ever watch it. I'm like, I'm not surprised. You go about your business. But every now and then, and truly, thankfully, because of her sons, my nephews, their friends are listeners. And they're like, oh, Mrs. McKinley, your brother has this great show. She's like, my kids' friends listen to your stuff. I'm like, yeah, I know.
So
God, it was great last night at, no kidding, at Green Day and Fall Out Boy and Weezer. I'm at the concessions in between bands, and we're going back to our seats. All of a sudden, I hear John Siuntres, and I'm like, and this listener's like, I love Word Balloon. I just want to tell you hello and how much I mean to. And it's one of my college friends, and he's like, how about that? I'm like, that's amazing. And it's happened to me at other public events at the Chicago Theater when I saw Jim Gaffigan live. A couple other audience members were listeners and stuff. And I was, again, with my sister, and she's like, what did those people want? And I'm like, they listen to my show. Really? And I'm like, yeah, really? I don't know how to break it to you. Jesus.
Those years of reading comics is finally paid off.
Seriously, all of my older cousins are manly men that got into carpentry and construction. And I was the nerd that was in the basement in the summertime watching monster movies in the Saturday afternoon instead of getting fresh air and stuff. And it's like, wow, all those wasted weekends have finally paid off, haven't they? And I'm like, yes, they have.
Yeah.
That's my business now. This is what I do.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You have, was it two nephews? Or is it...
my two. Yeah, I've got a 31-year-old nephew and a 27-year-old nephew.
So are they like my, Uncle John? He talks to me.
No. I'm just Uncle John. Although they're awesome, and as they got older and became adults, they like this is. I'm so sorry, Jason, but it does make me laugh. They know that I'm a pot smoker, and one year for Christmas, they bought me a pot grinder that's shaped like the Death Star.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, guys, I'm like, first of all, do not tell your mother you bought this from me.
Yeah.
I mean, Pam, my sister knows, but it's like, she kind of frowns upon it. And that's fine. I respect that, anyway. But yeah, I'm like, all right, it's okay. Cause I mean, really when they were little kids, I had to be guarded. I did introduce the oldest one to Star Wars on a Christmas morning when it was running on USA Networks.
Mm-hmm.
And he 5 years old, and he looks up at me. He's like, I like Star Wars. And I'm like, yes, you do. And the younger one, there's a terrible story, but I always have to listen. My sister is now divorced. I have no malice at all towards my ex-brother-in-law, but he was kind of a jock.
Mm-hmm.
And my younger nephew was having trouble reading.
Mm-hmm.
So I started buying him comics. And I bought him the comics like the original Teen Titan comic that was lifted off of the original Cartoon Network show, not Teen Titans Go, but the one from the early 2000s.
Yeah, there was another, yeah.
Yeah, when they were all kind of adolescents and everything.
Yeah.
A little more action rather than the humor of Teen Titans Go.
Yeah.
And he really got into them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my brother-in-law is like, listen, I don't mean to be rude, but they're kind of more jocks, and they're really into sports. And I hope you understand, dude. And I'm like, dude, I don't know if you noticed, but the kid's reading him, and you and your wife told me that he was having trouble reading.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's liking this kind of reading.
Yes.
Took a half second, and he put out his hand. He goes, "You are so right. I'm really sorry."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, it's cool, man. I'm like, everybody's into their own thing.
Yes.
And in fact, I would get made fun of at Sporting News Radio, one of the other radio jobs I had, because I would work from 4 to midnight, and I would stop on New Comic Book Day at the store, bring in my stack, because my boss was a big comic book fan. But there were a couple of the other jocks like, "Oh, did you get your little comic books today?"
Oh, man.
And I'm like, "Oh, are you wearing your little jersey to say, oh, I'm a big Boston Celtics fan? Aren't I cool?" And they're like, "Well, and they were defending rotisserie football. Well, I could make money at that." I'm like, hey, whatever. I'm very comfortable with who I am.
Yeah.
I'm like, I hope you're comfortable with who you are. I go, but I don't really care what you think.
Yeah.
I got news for you. And again, another guy who's like, yeah, you're right. I was kind of being an asshole. I'm sorry. I'm like, yeah, you were. It's like, don't be a jerk, man. Yeah. Everybody likes what they like. It's fine. Yes. And if you don't like something that other people like, who the hell cares?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And again, this was 15 years ago. And as I said, quoting Rocky Balboa, nobody's laughing anymore at this stuff.
Yes.
This is the new pop culture. This is the new mythology and adventure fiction that everyone gravitates to and is keeping the movie business alive.
Mm-hmm.
Because the last 16 months have shown you, even prior to that, though, the movies that people would go see in the theaters do not do the business they did when we were kids, when you and I were kids.
Yeah.
I mean, and Two Guns is a great example of that also adapted from a comic book. And that would have been a summertime movie hit in the theaters. And it didn't find its audience until DVD and cable. Why? Because that's where people are watching movies these days.
Yes.
Bad news, kids.
Yeah.
That's the reality. And I hope it changes, and I hope it comes back to some degree, and I think there will always be mid-sized budget films and artsy films that will make it to theaters, but the convenience and, frankly, the lack of manners in theaters, I think, have caused this situation that COVID only exacerbated in terms of now they're begging you to come back to the theaters.
Yeah.
And we'll see. I haven't seen Black Widow yet. I'm still debating if I'm going to spend $30 and watch. I probably will. I'm just kind of waiting for some paychecks to come in.
Oh,
but yeah, I mean, it's like, why would I sit in the theater when I can watch it at my convenience?
Yes. No, yeah. Yeah. Or, or kind of like, because I know Black Widow, I think it's going to be released on Disney Plus in October, I think.
Probably October, yeah. Yeah.
You could just wait a couple more months, too.
Sure. I would like to, and probably will, just because I'm so happy for her. Kelly Thompson is such a great new voice. It's been years, but relatively speaking, her success in comics, and she won the Eisner this year. I'm so happy for her. She's great. And truly, that's been another great thing of the last 10 years, is the proliferation of more women, more people of color, really making great books. Ram V is one of my favorite creators.
Yes.
And I can honestly say 3 years ago, I had no idea who Ram V was. And he's amazing. Ida Ayala is amazing. Teenie Howard is amazing. Kelly Thompson. So when the Girls Clubhouse only consisted of Kelly Sue DeConnick and Gail Simone, it's a much bigger clubhouse now. And that's wonderful. That's just wonderful.
Oh, yeah. For me, I'm going to say it because Gene, I can't think of his name. Gene Lang, Ewan Lang.
Oh yeah, Ewan Lang, absolutely.
Yeah, because when I heard that, he was going to do Shang-Chi the miniseries, I was so excited. It's like, and it's nothing against the other writers.
Of course not.
That wrote, no, because they had to, part of it was they had to do, they had to, work for a living. They did the best they could, but just to have Gene, just to write Shang-Chi, just to get his, his perspective.
A real Chinese perspective. Yeah. Oh, dude. Absolutely. And, damn, I never say his name right. Pornchak, Pornchak, The Good Asian is his book. Yes. And he was a Vertigo and DC editor, and now this is his first big debut. It's like, thank God. Yes, please. And truly, I'll tell you, Jason, I am very, and again, I say this sadly as a middle-aged white guy, I'm the last person people want to hear from these days. But I'm really, again, I consider myself very liberal and very inclusive and open to everybody doing great and doing great work. That said, I am a little angry at the stay in your lane campaign of, I don't want straight people writing gay characters. I don't want white people writing black characters and stuff. And it's like, okay, I don't want to see anyone being kept from doing a job. But by the same token, don't tell creative people what they can and can't write, because they're subject to their own imagination just like anybody else. Yeah. And just as happy as I am that Brian Hill has gotten the opportunities to write as much Batman that he has and his other white characters that he's written, and he's kicking ass as one of the Titans TV writers. I like the fact that Brian Azzarello wrote a great Luke Cage miniseries back in the day. And that and that Bendis used Luke in Avengers as effectively as he did.
Yes,
and things like that. And it's like or creating Riri Williams, that matter.
Yes,
Ironheart.
yes.
And it's like, don't give me stay in your own lane, because that's a crock of shit. And it's, again, it's great, and Gene's a great example, because while doing Shang-Chi, he's also spent years writing Superman, and has done a great job at that. Yeah. And also, of course, his own creator-owned stuff too that he's done. Yeah. He and Ta-Nehisi Coates are likely the two smartest guys in recent memory, who are like, hey, I know I got this genius grant, or I know I'm a well-respected Pulitzer-winning writer. Yeah, do you mind if I write comics? Sit down.
Yes.
Sit down. Start writing. What are you waiting for? I'm so excited for Ho Chi Anderson's Luke Cage that's coming out in the fall. And I've only become aware of Ho Chi in the last few months because of the company Neotext that does prose novellas that are priced cheaper than comics and are great genre fiction stories. And I won't deny that they are an IP company looking to exploit these things as TV and movies. But the original source material is good, and they're getting really good people to write it. And Ho Chi's a perfect example of that. And I'm going to touch base with him and arrange for a new word balloon to talk about what he wants to do with Luke Cage. And yeah, man, he's great. And he's a guy. Rodney Barnes, good Lord, Rodney Barnes is so good. And Also, unfortunately for him and me, it's like I mentioned, because he went to Howard, one of the historic black colleges.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't know if you were ever a boxing fan. Oh, I'm a massive boxing fan. And I knew Rock Newman, Riddick Bowe's manager. He went to Howard. I'm like, that's kind of where I was going, man, because I got to know Rock and Riddick in the 90s when I was covering. But oh, no kidding. And I'm like, oh, Rodney, you don't know what door you just opened, and now we're going to have to talk for another 20 minutes just about boxing. So I love Rodney. Rodney's amazing, and he is such a he's been involved in TV and film since the 90s. I mean, he was involved with the Pelican Brief and Damon Wayans' sitcom My Wife and Kids.
Oh yeah,
the Bernie Mac show, and he was a writer and a producer on all these things. And he is just starting to get his own TV and movie productions going. He's been making a series about the 1980s Lakers that's going to be an HBO miniseries.
Oh God!
So yeah, I mean, he is so ready to explode. And I had never heard of him. And my friend Chad, who worked with me on those Mainframe Comic-Con online shows that we did last year, he's like, hey, there's this guy who's got this like book that is just selling through the roof at Image called Philadelphia. It's vampires in Philadelphia. And he goes, his name's Rodney Barnes. And he goes, I really think you ought to interview him. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And I did like my homework on him. I'm like, you struck gold. This guy's a player. I'm like, this guy, and I mean, he had done the Lando miniseries for Marvel for Star Wars and stuff, and a couple other books here and there. He did a Nighthawk book with the Squadron Supreme.
Oh God, yeah.
He's great. He's great. And I'm like, or no, pardon me, I'm confusing him with David Walker. David did the Nighthawk miniseries, but shame on me. David's amazing too, by the way. And I love talking. David's another like old school guy. He's like close enough to our age where we'll talk about watching kung fu movies in the 70s and the Planet of the Apes movies and stuff. So no, I love David. I became more friends with through Bendis. So they co-teach a comic book writing class. But I mean, anyway, regardless, it's a great time right now, and everybody's at the table and are being heard. Yeah. By the same token, please don't tell white people that they can't write gay characters, or straight white people they can't write gay characters or characters of color. I think that's a crock of shit, and I'm not afraid to say that.
No, yeah. When you're talking about, I won the Black Label comic, the limited series, the other history of the DC universe.
Yes.
I can't think of the
John Ridley.
John Ridley. I mean, because
I love to talk to John.
The third issue when he wrote about Katana, I found I was I'm going to be honest, I didn't care who wrote it. It was great. It pulled me in. Sure. I could identify with Katana. The other thing too is because what John did was he meshed in a little bit of his history too, because I still remember, unfortunately, back in the early 80s when the automotive industry was like literally closing down. I remember that very famous incident where some auto workers beat up this Asian guy, because they thought he was Japanese. And I remember it made news back in the 80s. I remember that.
Wow.
But John brought that in, and I remember that. But the good thing about that, but like I said, what John's writing was he blended that and also, a little bit of the reality, but also to the comics history too as well. How Katana felt being in the Outsider, Batman and the Outsiders. And I thought that was great. And like I said again, I didn't care who wrote it because it's an African American male writing a Japanese female character.
Yeah.
But it was so great; it pulled me in.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, man. And I love that the Black Lightning issue of that history. Oh, yeah. I mean, that was amazing. And yeah, I mean, that's again, we are getting, and then there's another incredibly gifted creative that is like, I like comics. Can I write some comics? And of course, he had his American Way series years before what he's currently doing with Batman and the Secret History. And I'm looking forward to his Marvel work as well. Yeah. But no, and it's always interesting, not only from a different background standpoint in terms of color and creed and stuff like that, but also a guy like Tom Taylor being in Australia
Yes.
and what he does. And then I always feel this way, and I generalize about British colony writers who start writing American comics. Their point of view is so different than ours. And in fact, a guy that hated, I mean, I don't think he wrote that many, if any, superhero comics, except for Judge Dredd, and that's Pat Mills. Mm-hmm. And I love talking to Pat because he just has such a different perspective on not only American comics, but the American comics business. But others like James Robinson and, God, the co-creator of The Losers, the writer, and I can't think of it, with Jock. Shame on me. So good. Such a great British writer. But all the Brits that I get to talk to, John McRae, the wonderful drawer artist and storyteller. It's truly, and Mark Miller, of course, and Dave Gibbons. God, I mean, I pinch myself when it's like Mark is a friend, Dave Gibbons is a friend, and it's so great because Dave, and I know I've seen him do it to other people as well, where it's like, okay, I know I'm Dave Gibbons, relax, all right, we're friends, it's cool, and it's like, yeah, I mean, he doesn't say it that roughly, but essentially it's like, all right, cut this shit, quit worshiping me, and let's just talk like normal people. But it's like, yeah, but Dave, you got to understand, man, I was in college when Watchmen was coming out. And, I mean, even my best friend and former roommate, who was kind of tangentially into nerd stuff, but also he remembers Watchmen. And when I told him, I'm like, I'm thinking about doing a word balloon book eventually, Dave. And when I do, I really hope to keep our conversations in it. And he's like, oh, John, whatever you need. And then just in that lovely Dave Gibbons way. And it was like 2 a.m. Chicago time when I'm walking back from the bar at San Diego, and I had to call my buddy, and it was like Friday, so I'm like, hey, and he goes, I was up, and I'm like, Dave Gibbons knows who I am. He even says my last name right, and he goes, I go, remember Watchmen? He goes, wow, that's awesome. Or when we first were watching the Justice League animated series in the early 2000s, it's a Saturday night, we're watching it at his house, his wife walks in and goes, what are you watching?
Yeah.
He's like, okay, you don't understand. I know it's a cartoon, but the writing and the acting is so good. And my God, they really get these characters. I know, even if you sat down with us for 5 minutes, you might be impressed. And she did, and she was. And she's like, oh, no, actually, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I always tell Susan that story, my buddy who's Wonder Woman, Susan Eisenberg.
Yes.
But also, it's funny, at Terrificon, got to spend more time with Maria Canales-Barrera, Hawkgirl, and George Newbern, Superman. And I told them that story too, and it's like, no, you don't understand. I'm like, and they've heard it a million times. But again, that's how good the content is now. And thankfully, there's an adult audience that grew up on this stuff like we did, like you and I did. But also, the kids love it too, and it's a great way for them to bond with their kids. Stargirl, I'm so glad the second season is up and running. Last year, during the summer of COVID, we're all sad as hell. And Stargirl could not have been a better, more positive, I think, show to drop. And all of us are like, oh, thank God it's good. And my kids like it too. And we could both watch it on these different levels. It's so good. So that was terrific to see.
Yeah. But I just think that, because I'm going to say, I haven't seen Stargirl yet.
Okay.
It's just trying to find time.
There's a million things to watch. Believe me. I know.
But I think for me, I think you hit a very good point. Is that now I don't have kids, but I just only can imagine the last 10, 20 years. I don't know if there are any shows that parents could watch with their kids. Instead of going, okay, we got to watch iCarly, but oh God,
right. All the Disney stuff, man.
But now they can watch it. Go, hey, I remember reading, or I remember hearing something.
Yes,
like that that's the adult, and it's also great for the kids too.
Did your parents read comics?
I'm going to say my parents were. Yes, I'm going to say, but let me start off. My parents were divorced, but yes,
okay.
My dad read some comics, but my mom was more of the reader, and she read comics. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. My mom was the original reader. She passed away when I was 5, and that sucked. But listen, I'm okay. It was, believe me, I would have preferred the alternative because she was an incredible woman as I learned about her and stuff. And such a Laura Petrie. Such a woman of the early 60s. down to the capri pants,
Mhm.
listening to bossa nova jazz,
Mhm.
and really was like, he's going to read.
Yes.
And he's going to read early. And they really started me reading at like 3, where I was reading the comic strips and stuff. And it was great mentioning that parents and their kids can share an experience. We were on vacation. This is after my mother had passed away, and my father had remarried at this point.
Mhm.
But we were in the Wisconsin Dells, big tourist area of Wisconsin. And we were at some store, and there was a gift shop, and they had comics. And they had one of the giant Treasury Edition issues of Shazam, the Captain Marvel book.
Mhm. Yes.
And it was the white covered Treasury Edition. And my dad's like, "Oh, Captain Marvel, you want that?" He goes, I used to read that when I was a kid. And I'm like, "Yes, please." So it was great. And I know, and forgive me, Jason, because I know we're deviating from your question list.
No.
But I know in the questions you were asking, you acknowledged my first comic was Superman. What was it, 283 or whatever?
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
Chris Delbart, The Wolf of Wall Street. It was Superman's new secret identity. I know. I love his name, Chris Delbart, The Wolf of Wall Street. Ridiculous. Great cover. Great. He flies in, and you see him transitioning into Chris rather than Clark. And he had brown hair, and he had a mustache. He had glasses on. It was hilarious. When Bendis wrote that Superman and Lois were going undercover, and Superman could kink his hair and make it look like a fro, I'm like, dude, it should have been Chris Delbert. He goes, "Where were you 3 months ago when I was writing this thing?" He goes, because he called him Chaz or whatever the hell he called him and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you blew it. It should have been Chris Delbert, man. So anyway, I'm mentioning the Shazam Treasury Size Edition.
Yeah.
At that Alpine Pharmacy, that's where I would buy my first comics.
Mhm.
And my introduction to the Marvel Universe. I mean, I had seen the Marvel superhero cartoons.
Mhm. Yes.
They were on in syndication when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And the Spider-Man cartoons. So I was aware of some characters. I had no idea who the Avengers were. And it was the Avengers Treasury Edition that reprinted the marriage of the Wasp and Yellow Jacket.
Mhm.
And also the first Vision stories were in there. And to the point where when I saw Black Panther,
Mhm.
I'm like, is that Batman? Kind of looks like Batman.
Yeah.
But he looks like he's black under the mask. And he doesn't have a cape, and that's a different costume. So then I read the book, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. So that, and also the Fantastic Four. Again, I remembered the cartoon, the old '60s cartoon.
Yeah.
But the Galactus story was collected in that Treasury edition. That blew my mind.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Mhm.
So that was my introduction to Marvel. So I was a DC kid first, more than a Marvel kid.
Mhm.
But really, obviously, grew to appreciate the Marvel books. But I do have to say, at the end of the day, I do lean more towards DC than I do Marvel.
Mhm.
And there are certain books that are massive sellers
Yes.
that I could care less about just because I don't care about the characters.
Yeah.
And the greatest example of that is the X-Men. And I appreciate the X-Men for what they are,
Yes.
and everything they've done, and the movies have been great, and the television shows have been great, even Mutant X back in the 90s.
Oh my
God.
God.
Wait,
because Fiona, was it the actress Fiona Hughes who played Emma Frost? Oh my God.
Well, and again, I mean, we mentioned some of the schlocky 70s movies. I mean, going into the 90s, that Nick Fury movie that Fox made.
Yes,
that was fun. It was fun.
David Hasselhoff.
And Lisa Arena as the Contessa.
Oh.
Countess Valentina.
I have to say.
Oh, yeah, man. No, it was, come on. Fun.
The only thing, I'm going to say the 1978 Doctor Strange movie, the only thing I remembered from that movie was the late, great Jessica Walters, because I was like, wow, she's hot. And that's all. That's all I remember.
No, you're right. Archer's mom. Absolutely. And, of course, Arrested Development. Yes. But no, good luck. Dude, I've, being the Star Trek fan that I am,
yes,
Shatner, 2 years before Star Trek, made this one-season lawyer show called For the People.
Oh, no.
And Jessica Walters, and this is like 64 or maybe 65.
Okay.
And Jessica Walters played his wife. And if you thought 70s Jessica Walters was hot, check out 1960s Jessica Walters. She was lovely. She's beautiful. She really, just like Diana Rigg in the Avengers, it's like, who is that beautiful woman? And thank God she's making this cool stuff. But I mean, play Misty for Me, of course, her movie with Clint Eastwood from the early 70s. No, she was amazing. She was a great, great actress who could do anything. She really could do any genre.
Yes.
Comedy, horror, heavy drama. And what a final act of her life to have the success she did with Arrested Development and Archer.
Yes.
Pretty cool.
Yes. Cool. Yeah. You touched up on Star Trek. How big of a Star Trek fan are you?
I love Star Trek.
I'm
as you are. I'm of that. When it went into syndication in the early 70s, I have very early memories of 1969 when my mother was still alive and my father, and Star Trek being on television. I don't know if they were watching it, but the TV was on, and I remember seeing it in 1969 because I was really excited when our local affiliate started running Star Trek reruns in the early 70s.
Yes.
So I go back to that generation of, I would say, starting in the 70s. I love Star Trek. Star Trek seemed legitimately possible to me, being a kid that grew up during the Apollo program, Back to Astronauts. And it was like, okay, this is supposed to be 400 years or 300 years in the future. We could be going to other planets by then. And, and there could be bigger spaceships with giant crews rather than 3 people in a capsule. So this is possible. So I kind of bought it as a kid. And then appreciated as I got older for Roddenberry's ideals during the midst of, I honestly, I'm glad I had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on my show to compare the civil strife of the 1960s and 70s to what we're going through today. I do believe that it was still worse in the 60s, but not by much. Sadly, our current culture is trying very hard to compete with the level of hatred and abuse that people suffered. And here was Gene Roddenberry in the midst of that saying, we're going to get past this. We're all going to be working together. And to have the balls, not only to have Asians and people and women of color on his bridge, but also a Russian, a Soviet back then at the height of the Cold War. And it's like, no, sorry, Earth's going to get their shit together. We're going to be a better society, and everyone's going to be involved. And if I may, and you've given me the invitation to talk about Star Trek for a moment, that is my frustration with new Star Trek. How dare they destroy what Gene Roddenberry set up? And I can even appreciate the argument of, well, Gene didn't believe in conflict, and that in fact, he didn't, or I should say, because he had died by the time Deep Space Nine was created, but Majel Roddenberry, Waxana Troy from Next Generation and Nurse Chapel from the original series, she was on record saying, Gene wouldn't like Deep Space Nine because there's too much conflict on it, and especially between the people from Earth. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I understand that argument, but most of the conflict was coming from the other alien races. And much like Serling with the Twilight Zone, Roddenberry and the writers were able to disguise current issues in allegory with alien races and talk about today's problems. And shame on you, new Star Trek, for going, well, that's not realistic. And it's like, no, it never was meant to be really realistic. It's an ambition for the future, but it is in the DNA of Star Trek. And how dare you? Now I sound like Pat Cooper, the old comedian. How dare you? But it's true. How dare you ruin the coda of Star Trek that always made it Star Trek, even Deep Space Nine, and come up with this bullshit of all of a sudden the Federation is xenophobic, or even worse now in the last season of Discovery, that Earth is so xenophobic. It's like, fuck you. You don't even know Star Trek. I have heard stories about the top executives that are in charge of the showrunners of Star Trek. One guy who we all know just got a 5-year extension, and I heard a specific story about him, Alex Kurtzman. I don't mind naming him because, unfortunately, if you look at his track record, he's done a lot of nerd stuff that has failed. He did the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies. He did the Tom Cruise Mummy movie. This guy fails a lot. He had one hit that was a reboot, and that's Hawaii Five-0 on CBS. And that's why CBS is in love with him and letting him do whatever the hell he wants, including what he's doing with Star Trek. But I heard a horror story about him that I won't go into detail because it's not my story to tell, where it is painfully obvious this guy knows dick about Star Trek. I have no idea how much or how little he's watched of Star Trek, but he pitched an idea about new Trek that should be used. And the people he was pitching it to, that was done every week on one of the Star Trek spinoff shows of the 90s. And he's like, oh, I didn't know that. And it's like, yeah, of course you didn't, because you don't really give a shit about this thing that you're in charge of. So it is really upsetting to me, obviously.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, I still go into every week of new Trek going, well, maybe I'll like this episode better.
Yeah.
Maybe, because they do have people involved that do know Star Trek.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Lower Decks, I mean, they just had their first episode as we're recording this.
Mm-hmm.
I was disappointed in the opening of the second season. And again, and even Mike McMahon, I believe in the case of Mike McMahon, and he is a definite hardcore Star Trek fan. I have a feeling he's being noted to death by, if not Kurtzman, others upstairs saying, that's a little, I know we said it's an adult cartoon, but that's a little harsh. Can you tone it down? And when we get toned down, I believe, are second and third rewrite ideas rather than original ideas. And it's not fun. It's not funny enough. Yeah. It's not clever enough. And Star Trek was always a leader in terms of doing things in science fiction we never saw before.
Yes.
And now it's a follower, and we're getting watered down Blade Runner and Battlestar Galactica and that in a lot of the live action shows. I am holding out hope for Strange New Worlds.
Me too.
But again, it's still these idiots on top. And my fear is also their agenda is, and their political woke agenda. And I feel like an asshole saying that, because I support 90% of what people who identify that as we want more of this. Yeah. I am with you 90% of the time. There is that 10% of the time where it's more important to have the woke agenda in front of the story. And that's where you fail. Because you still have to entertain me with a good story. And I have to say that when it comes to new Star Trek, I've yet to be entertained. I liked the 2009 J.J. Abrams movie. Yes. That's the last piece of new Star Trek that I liked.
Because going back, like you said, the original Star Trek series, it was a meta, like you said, the science
metaphor.
Yeah. Because a very good example was A Private Little War. It was right because nobody knew it was about the Vietnam War at that time. You're right, and you know,
or even the obvious of let that be your last battlefield. Yes. With Frank Gorshin and the other actor, and they were half black and half white.
Yeah,
but they were on opposite sides of their face. Don't you see the difference?
Yeah,
and it's like, no, we really don't. Or God, even that wonderful. I can't remember the name. Omega Glory, the one where they're on the planet and they create Kalis and Abraham Lincoln.
Oh no. Oh shoot.
You know what I'm talking about? Yes, Savage Curtain. Hey, no, not Savage
Curtain. With Yarnak, the rock monster.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Well, anyway, but you know, Lincoln is. I won't say the word, but Lincoln was on the bridge and says, "Oh, what a charming," and he doesn't say the N word, but it's a derivative.
Yes.
Of Negro.
Yeah.
And I guess it's okay to say the word negress. I mean, again, and every, you know, and he and whatever. And again, it's a manifestation of Lincoln. But he's like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. And Nichelle Nichols does that beautiful speech of, no, sir, we're above words. That's not a bad word. It's you know, we're not offended by words. We've evolved.
Yeah.
And it's like, what a wonderful message. And now instead, you get the bullshit that you get on Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I don't. Or even God, they have their non-binary character.
Yes.
The Trill. And she's like, I prefer to be called they. And they really have to hold this pregnant pause moment of, wow, look at what we're doing. And it's like, because like, you know, Stamets, Anthony Rapp is like, okay, I'll call you they. I'm sorry. And it's like, yeah, it should have just been oh, sure, of course, no problem.
Yeah,
that's all it should have been. Yes. And I think it would have had the same emotional impact. But the producers really wanted to let you know, hey, non-binary, we're giving you a big moment here. And it's like, relax.
Yeah.
I get it, because it's like, I don't know how to break it to you, but Star Trek has been woke from day one.
Yes. It's
that simple. It's that simple. Yes. And I hate going to StarTrek.com because it has become a woke idea of a website, more so than just, hey, there's a new Star Trek book, let's check it out, or hey, let's do this. And it's this friendship is magic that is fine. And God bless you. I love all that.
Yes.
But you don't have to be so obvious. It's like, we get it. We're cool. And again, I'm saying this as, again, last person that you want to hear from, middle-aged white guy. So I'm curious. I have friends who went to the Vegas convention this weekend.
Yes.
And I haven't heard back yet, but I'm really looking forward to. In fact, on our we're back doing our Trek Watch with Franco and my buddy Mitch because there's new Star Trek every week, so that's when we do it. And our buddy Wayne from Canada went down to Vegas, and he went to the convention, so he's going to be on to tell us, what his thoughts and everything. So that'll be fun.
The other thing I'm going to say is, because I know in one of your guys' review episodes, I think it was like you, in one of your Star Trek Discovery review, podcast review, I remember, because, I'm going to say, because I watched Star Trek Discovery, it's not, I don't know, for me, it's not Star Trek, but my wife loves it.
Cool.
She also likes The Next Generation, but I
love The Next Generation.
Yeah, but I'm not going to keep telling her, oh, this is wrong. I'm not going to, it's just I'm letting her enjoy it, because this is, but the other.
No, and it's good to have a nerd show that your wife is into, so that's cool.
Yeah, it is. But the thing I love what you said in that one review episode was, it would have been better if this was just a different side, if it was just a regular science fiction show.
Yes.
I accept it more.
I would accept it more as its own thing rather than Star Trek, because it doesn't look like Star Trek to me.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing too is that, but for me, because I kept, and I know I've told my wife a couple of times, is I wish, instead of putting it in the original series universe, I wish they would have put it in the Kelvin universe.
Yes, I agree with that too.
Then I can see, okay, I can.
Yeah, there could be subtle differences. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, hey man, and forgive me for interrupting, but yeah, I mean, making Michael Burnham Spock's sister is not only an insult to Spock, but I think, frankly, lessens Michael Burnham as a character in her own right. Jean-Luc Picard did not need to be the grandson of James Kirk to be interesting. None of the Next Generation characters had to be descendants or related to the original series. In fact, they did their damnedest to stay away from it until that episode where Sarek shows up.
Yes.
And it's great, and I love that episode. And that was another thing in terms of new Trek, and I've said this before many times on my show. Compare Mark Lenard's very subtle, very Vulcan performance of Sarek to James, I can't remember his name, new Star Trek, the guy that's been on Discovery as Michael Burnham's stepfather.
Yeah.
And he seems delighted by humans in a way that Sarek never was in the series or in the movies or in Next Generation. And I always point to it, that amazing last scene, or one of the last scenes in Star Trek 4, where Spock and Sarek are talking, and Sarek allows himself to come and say, maybe I was wrong. These people that you associate with, they're of good character. Maybe I was wrong about you joining Starfleet. And Spock just looks at him and almost shrugs and goes, they're my friends. And it's great because Sarek pulls back and becomes the Vulcan that he is. And he's like, yes, of course. And kind of dismissive of, oh, yeah, it's that human shit again. All right. I understand. This is my son. I tolerate it. That is Sarek.
Yes.
The other guy that showed up in Discovery was just too bemused by the various human frailties and choices that emotional people make. And I'm like, and this is supposed to be 10 years before Journey to Babel when we first see Sarek.
Yeah.
And I'm like, sorry, I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
This isn't Sarek. And again, like you said, I could see a Kelvin Sarek possibly being different. And also, and something else I've said a million times, a real missed opportunity. I'm okay with Michael Burnham being raised by Vulcans.
Yes.
It would have been more interesting to be raised by different Vulcans and have the opportunity to have Sarek on a show and have a different Burnham father who's a Vulcan have a conversation about humans with Sarek.
Yes.
And because it almost makes it seem like Martin Luther King was the only civil rights leader. Where it's like Sarek seems to be the only guy that understood of humans. And again, it's those kind of choices that I think New Trek makes as fan service that unfortunately I think blows up in their face for us old timers. Where like, all you're showing is you have no original ideas and you don't understand. T'Pol and Tuvok were great Vulcan characters
Yes.
that came from the subsequent shows.
Mm-hmm.
And same with Dr. Salar on Next Generation, or other times they would show other Vulcans. And they didn't need to be another half-brother or half-sister to Spock.
Yeah.
And I say that with great respect to Lawrence Luckenbill, who I had the opportunity to speak with this year. And I gave him his due. And like, listen, you get a lot of shit.
Yeah, but
you did a great job in that movie, and he did do a great job. It's not a great movie, but Sybok is a great character.
No, but he was great as Sybok. Yes,
yeah.
I'm going to say yes. You're right. Star Trek V was not the great movie, no. but there are key moments and I'm not talking. The key moments I'm not talking about is what does God need with a starship? Not that part.
Yeah.
The nice campfire scene in the beginning.
Yeah, the family stuff. Yeah.
Oh, God, that was great. Or
when Scotty breaks him out of the jail. You don't know a jailbreak when you see one. Just like, because that's the thing. They're also, and then it bled into Star Trek 6 and 4 as well, where it's like, no, these guys know each other. Like, they've been serving together for decades, and we bought it because we've been on the journey with them that long. That's why Star Trek Into Darkness sucks so bad when they tried to recapture that Khan moment of, oh my God, you're my best friend. No, you're not. You just met 6 months ago. Shut up. You didn't earn the death scene the way that Shatner and Nimoy earned that death. Oh my God, Wayne, our Canadian buddy who was at the convention, took a picture of the plexiglass when they do autograph pictures that the star and the person have to be between now.
Yeah.
And I immediately sent back that sad shot of Spock dead and Kirk behind the glass and everything. Because it's like, it's like that, man. Smile.
But
that's how they should do it. They should have either the celebrity or the fan be Spock, and the celebrity should be Kirk or Spock or whatever. That's a picture.
I'm gonna say Star Trek Into Darkness. It had some. I'm gonna say it had some moments.
I'd almost make you checklist me the moments, but go on.
No.
I didn't mind the pre-title sequence when they're on the planet and they're running like hell and the natives are running after them. I thought that was cute.
But I have to tell you the funny story. When me and my wife saw it in theaters, and you in the scene where it's Chris Pine's Kirk is behind the plexiglass, and you see Spock, and the needs of the many, and blah blah blah. And when Kirk dies, Zach Quintana says Spock goes, God! And I squeezed my wife's hand, going, oh my God, I can't believe it. I was just like, oh, that was such a cringeworthy moment.
Absolutely, man. Yeah.
But I have to tell you, Star Trek Into Darkness, for me, that fight scene in the end with Khan and Spock just having that animal rage fight, I'm going to say it kind of, to me, it retconned something in the original series, because Sarah, I can't believe we're really going, but anyway.
I love this. Go on.
Yeah, so, because I remember in Journey to Babel, Sarek told Kirk that, Vulcans have the strength of 10 men. In Space Seed, Khan tells Kirk, I have the strength of 5 men. So it's like, in the Space Seed, it should have been Spock and Khan. But in Star Trek Into Darkness, it was Spock and Khan. I was like, oh, this is great. And just
I respect that.
Spock is just letting loose. And I think they missed that, because in the beginning, Spock talks about how he lost his mom, how he lost Vulcan.
Sure.
And if they had run that story and all that grief, all that anger of loss, just explodes right there.
I respect that, man, Jason, because honestly, I still hold my own opinion that their choices, while they justify them by the movie's plot on why this is a more emotional Spock, when you give us a more emotional Spock, that means McCoy wins. And frankly, I think that's what disappears. And as much as I initially liked in 2009 Quinto's performance as Spock, in the subsequent movies, he was always too emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of my problems with new Star Trek, where the cage was not a blueprint of this is where Spock was at that moment. It's like, no, this is where the story was at that moment, and they hadn't figured out every character yet.
Yeah. Yes.
And midway through the first season, because there are episodes of Spock smiling in the first season of the original series, but when they finally settled down, it's like, no, he has emotions, no question. God, there's that great This Side of Paradise where with Jill Ireland, and just that fact that, you know, she's in love with him and the spores let him be emotional, and he's hurt that he can't be what he wants to be, or Journey to Babel when he can't be there emotionally for his father, and Jane Wyman Amanda is yelling at him and like, that's your father, get your ass in there, and he's like, I can't. And it's like, wow, just I mean, that Spock, man, is that internal struggle. Yes. And when the safety is off, then the character disappears from me. Yes. And at the end of the day, I'm not a big fan of Quinto's performance as Spock. I am rooting for Ethan Peck. I hope that he won't be laughing and smiling, but I have a bad feeling that we're kind of stuck with this because they are convinced, well, that's fine. You know, he learned to be more poker-faced. And it's like, yeah, he learned that a lot earlier. And that's why I love in the original animated series, Yesteryear. Yesteryear is such a great episode, and especially being a 23-minute cartoon. And so great, and it should be canon. And all of us fans are like, yeah, sorry, Gene, but fuck you, it's canon. Yeah. And we love this story because it's really early Spock. And more so than what we got in 2009. I agree with you in the 2009 movie. I do love when old Spock tells Chris Pine, Jim, I just lost my mother and my planet. Believe me, I'm compromised. Yes. And I loved moments like that. Yeah. And I loved that old Spock was talking to Pine like it was his friend that he's known forever, even though Pine didn't know who the hell he was. Yeah. And it was great. And that was really terrific to see. And I like how the trajectory of Spock allowed him to mellow by the time of unification and Next Generation. Yes. And that great conversation he has with Data about, you know, how do you perceive humans? How do you perceive humans? Yes. And do you regret not embracing your, or do you know, whatever Data said? And he said, I have no regrets. And he says, regrets, that's a human emotion. And he says, yeah, you're right. And I am, and you know, and that's great. And it's a shame in my own fanfic in my mind, I would love to see scenes leading up to Sarek's death where they might have argued about the Cardassian War and whether they should intervene or not, or even Spock's attempts to unify with the Romulans. And I would see Sarek as being against it. Yes. And Spock going, Father, you don't understand. Everyone has the compassion to change, or the ability to change. You know, I believe in this or whatever. And just like you hear from Sarek's second wife, Perry, you know, just like, it used to upset me, and I knew it upset Sarek when they would have these arguments and stuff. And it's like, it's a shame we didn't get those. And I would love to see more novel fiction or whatever leaning into that era. And again, seeing the differences of the two men. Because I think there's some missed opportunities of conversation that I'd love to hear.
When you talk about the 2009 star, I have to throw out this last.
By all means, I'm so sorry for the multi-minute tangent on this, but I love Star Trek.
I'm sorry. I know we're going. You don't have another interview, huh? I just want to make sure you don't have anything planned after this.
Well, I do tonight. If you don't mind, I would like to finish probably by the bottom of the hour. But Jason, I'd be happy to do another part if you want to arrange for another part.
Yeah. Okay. So
I know we didn't get to a lot of what's in your outline.
Don't worry about that. So one last thing.
Tell me about 09. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So real quickly, Bread and Circus. That one, I don't know if it was like a 30-second scene it's always cut out in syndication, where McCoy and Spock are in jail in the prison, and then Spock, they're arguing like, thank you, Spock, and he's like, human emotions, I'll never understand that. And he goes, I'm just trying to say thank you, and he's like, you're more afraid of living than dying. Yep. You don't know what it would be like to really feel, like how to experience a real human emotion. Yes. You see Leonard Nimoy kind of like, he grabs the bars and he's looking down like, oh my God, McCoy knows. He knows my deepest, darkest secret. Yeah, but that's so classic.
No, and then he straightens up and he's a Vulcan again. He's like, really, Doctor? You don't think I know? And there was a great short story in one of the early collections of fan produced short, not in the Strange New World books.
Okay.
Before that, and it's McCoy and Kirk or McCoy and Spock, and it's just dialogue between them the way it was written. So it's a quote of Spock's and then a quote of McCoy's back and forth, and they're in some sort of jail that the temperature is ridiculously hot, and it's like, boy, it's hot. McCoy's like, man, it's really hot in here, and Spock's like, hotter than you can imagine. And he's like, really, does it feel like Vulcan? He goes, it's even worse. And they go back and forth, and then they get into this intellectual argument of Spock's humanity, and it kind of turns around to the point where even McCoy apologizes and is like, I'm sorry, sometimes I don't give you enough credit for the emotions you do have or whatever. And it's a great exchange. And also Foley and Webb, when they think Kirk is dead, and those are some of the best McCoy and Spock moments as well. And again, it's that this bond they have because of Jim Kirk that keeps them friends. Yes, that they're friends too. And I love that too about the movies. That like in 3,
yes,
when they rescue Spock's body and before Spock's Kotra can be put back in him, and McCoy's like, I want to tell you, I've really missed you. And I didn't realize how much I care about you. And it's just like stuff like that. No, those are beautiful. And of course them camping in 5 is just, I mean, that's right. It's like, no, man, these are like two cousins that have never gotten along, but deep down they love each other. I mean, and that is the strength of Star Trek.
Yes.
I'm just not feeling it from New Trek. I don't see those connections. We got it in Next Generation. We got it in Deep Space Nine and Voyager. The connections they're trying, like, I believe Tilly and Burnham's relationship is real. I don't believe Tilly's career trajectory is very real, but whatever. Captain Tilly, for Christ's sake. Yes. First Officer Tilly. Yeah. Sure. Okay. I guess if you want it that way. Whatever.
Slowly wrap things up because I know we're going to.
Sure, buddy.
Soon. Okay. But I want to ask you these 2 last Star Trek questions.
Sure.
Your meeting with Leonard Nimoy. I remember.
Very brief, but memorable. Go on.
Please. No, please.
Oh, sure. It was the year it was 2009. It was the year that the JJ movie came out. And there used to be this great Orlando comics and nerd show that they don't do anymore. But I was invited a couple years in a row. And it was really great because I did get to meet a lot of really terrific celebrities. I got to meet Peter Graves, Mr. Phelps from Mission Impossible. God. And it was so great because we were all in the same hotel and in the same floors. So not only would we see each other at the conventions, we'd run into each other going back to our rooms or going in the morning or whatever. And I had seen Mr. Graves a couple times in a row and introduced myself that by Sunday, I'm like, oh, Mr. Graves, good to see you again. Hi, John. How are you? And I'm like, that's awesome. Peter Graves knows me by name. This is so fun. I'm sure he'll forget, but I don't care. This is great. So Nimoy was going to do a panel, and Nimoy's had been doing panels literally since the original series. And he probably tapered off in the 2000s and didn't do as many. But, he knew how to run. Like, he didn't need me to, like, moderate a panel. They're like, we just need someone to introduce Mr. Nimoy. So I'm like, it would be my honor to introduce Mr. Nimoy. So I wanted to give him his due for everything that he did in his career. And so I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, we all know him and we love him, but not only as a fine actor, but a fine author, a fine painter, and a fine and a fine movie director as well.
Yes.
I go, but of course he'll always be Mr. Spock to us, ladies and gentlemen, Leonard Nimoy. Massive, of course, nothing to do with me. Massive applause. Nimoy comes out. Nimoy towers. I'm 5'8". Nimoy towers over me. He's in this great all white. I have a clip of his panel on my YouTube channel.
Okay.
And also he was doing Fringe for JJ, and that's how JJ got him for Star Trek, because he was playing that character William Bell on the Fringe TV show. But he shakes my hand and he says, "Nicely done, son." And I said, "Okay, thank you." And I held my shit together. Yes. But I'm like, that's great, man. Because again, I was lucky, Jason. I mean, like I said, I spent 10 years at the local sports station and got to meet and talk to Michael Jordan on many occasions, and all the Bulls and all the Cubs and all the White Sox and all the Chicago Bears. I mean, everybody. Yes. So I could steel myself enough so I couldn't be like, my God, I'm talking to Michael Jordan in my brain, but I could compartmentalize that and keep a calm demeanor.
Yes.
But it was really hard with with Leonard Nimoy. I've seen Shatner.
Mhm.
I got to go in a very exclusive press conference when there were only 50 of us in the room watching the introduction of Star Trek Discovery when Brian Fuller was still there. And they had Jerry Ryan and Michael Dorn and Brent Spiner and Shatner and Scott Bakula. Am I leaving anybody? And Michael Dorn, if I didn't already mention him. But they were all up there with Brian Fuller, and they were all talking about Star Trek in general. So I saw Shatner. But at this show, that was my chance to meet Nimoy. At that same show, George Takei was there, and this is when Heroes was on, or it might have been the year before. Okay. But Heroes was on, and he played Hero's father, the character Hero. And we're all like, George, nice going, man. This is a great role. And he's like, yes, I know. And he was very, very proud. But he was incredibly cool, too. And then also at those shows, we got to slam back drinks with Jonathan Frakes.
Oh my God!
And he was great because not only did he tell us Star Trek stories, but when he was a young actor in New York, Marvel would have promotional things where they would have people in costume, and he dressed as Captain America. And there was a blood, sweat, and tears concert in the mid '70s, and it was balls hot. It was at I think at Shea or one of the stadiums, maybe Yankee Stadium. And backstage at the green room, the riders, the contracts that bands make, sometimes they put ridiculous stuff in there, like no brown M&Ms for Van Halen, to make sure that the people that are hosting the concert are really reading the whole thing and give them everything they want, because that's what it's. And so they're almost there as tricks. Now, I don't know if this was tricks or whatever, but they wanted Marvel superheroes to be in the green room to entertain them while they were there. And so Jonathan was Captain America.
Yes.
And then this other guy was Spider-Man. And it was really, really hot. So the band's like, hey, you don't have to wear the masks.
Yeah.
Like, be comfortable back here, guys. So Jonathan took his cowl off.
Yeah.
And was drinking beers with the guys. Spider-Man would not break character, did not take his mask off, and would suck beer through the mouthless mask to drink the beer and stuff that they were having. And he said they were like guzzling beer bottles. And Spider-Man looked like a baby with like a pacifier bottle kind of sucking on his bottle. It was hilarious. So yeah, like this is like midnight and 1 a.m. and Jonathan Frakes telling us these stories. And we're like, this is fantastic. I can't believe my life. I can't believe how lucky I am.
But shaking hands with Leonard Nimoy, it's not, I mean, it wasn't like, it's not like, take a photo op or something. No, it's
right.
Oh my God.
And he was very sweet to like be like, hey, thank you for the nice introduction.
And he was genuine.
And I'm like, wow. Again, I'm like, he's like, nicely done, son. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm like, okay. And I bet the other one you wanted me to talk about is Avery Brooks, I'm assuming.
Yes.
That was incredible. Avery Brooks, I believe, wants to be as enigmatic as you see him when he is being interviewed as Avery Brooks. I have no problem with that. I love Ben Sisko. I unabashedly say that Ben Sisko is, as much as I adore Patrick Stewart and of course William Shatner and of course even Kate Mulgrew and even Scott Bakula, who I think had a really thankless job of doing what he did on Enterprise, but I think it was all the captains are great in my book. But Avery Brooks was so great, and the fact that Ira Behr, the showrunner, eventually allowed Avery to be much more visceral and a warrior captain as he was. And you really felt that more of his personality came in after season 4 and through the final season. So yeah, it was at the Wizard Chicago show, and I'm at the Hyatt after hours, and there's Avery Brooks at the bar, and he's waiting to order his drink, and I'm like, Mr. Brooks, yes. I'm like, I just want to tell you, as much as I love Ben Sisko, I really loved your portrayal of Hawk, who was a character from Spencer for Hire, the TV show, but also the Spencer novels. And I'm a massive Robert Parker fan, and they're among my favorite crime novels. And I said, I've seen, by then others had played him because this was in the 2000s, had played Hawk. And I'm like, you're the quintessential Hawk. And I'm really bummed that A Man Called Hawk, a spinoff show, only was like half a season. I said, because it really should have been more. And he's like, thank you. That's really kind. And he shook my hand. He's, what's your name? I said, John. One more time. I said, Mr. Brooks, please. I'm like, let me buy this round for you. Oh, that's not necessary. I'm like, oh, truly, it'd be my pleasure. And in that Ben Cisco way, he put his hand on my shoulder. And he, in that Ben Cisco voice, is like, John, you don't have to buy me a drink. We're having a lovely conversation. And seriously, man, I was 4 years old again. And I mean, I held my cool,
Yes.
and I'm sure my voice was fine, but inside my voice was like, okay, I'm going to walk away now. I'm going to leave you alone. But thank you very much. It's really been a pleasure meeting you. And he smiled, and he's like, and again, I think my bass voice was fine.
Yeah.
But I'm like, yeah, listen, I don't want to take any more of your time. I'm like, seriously, It's an honor to meet you. And thank you so much for talking to me. He's like, it's my pleasure. And I'm like, wow, man, fucking Avery Brooks, Captain Cisco. Good Lord. I would walk through a wall for Captain Cisco. He's Ben Cisco, for God's sake. The best.
Oh, my
And Nimoy, too. No, seriously, man. I pinch myself when I am so lucky to, and I would include the old creators that I get to speak to as well.
Mm-hmm.
Truly, if my 10-year-old self knew that I'd be talking to Neil Adams and I'd be talking to Walt Simonson and getting to know Denny O'Neil before he passed away, and my buddy Marty Pasco, who I still cry about. I miss Marty tragically because he's literally, he was 10 years older than me. We really got a great bond.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me great advice, and I was able to help him in tough times for him as well. I really miss talking to Marty. I'm so glad that we literally have at least 10 hours, if not more, of conversation that when I miss Marty, I can go back and listen to and smile.
Yeah.
But that was a tough loss, and that was right around the beginning of COVID. It wasn't COVID related.
Mm-hmm.
Marty was having medical problems for a couple of years leading up to that. But yeah, it's I miss him. I miss him a lot. But it's great. I mean, the ability to have these opportunities to talk to these people, it's amazing.
John, I'm just gonna and I'm sorry about hearing about Barney. Like I remember, I think you talked about it because I went on the when you were talking to the guys, the San Diego Comic-Con Saturday. Because I heard about that. Yeah, I remember you were talking about that. That when Marty passed away, it was a big loss. It really hit you hard.
Yeah, I mean, again, we really became friends. I mean, I got him to 2 different conventions, one in Cincinnati and one in Salt Lake City.
Mm-hmm.
And I told the organizer, I'm like, you really ought to have Marty Pasco. He's got great stories.
Yes.
And, I mean, not only did he contribute as much as he did to the Superman mythos, but he was surrounded and friends with everybody, Steve Gerber and Denny O'Neil and Elliot Maggin and Carrie Bates. And in a lot of ways, he was I believe Paul Kupperberg has now taken this place of being the keeper of the flame that was there going back to even the late 70s in the case of Paul, but Marty in the mid 70s, and knowing what DC was like back then.
Yeah.
Because we really get a lot of Marvel bullpen stories over the decades.
Yes.
We don't get as many DC stories.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why. And Paul was good friends with Marty as well. And I'll admit this. I sometimes worry just because of these guys being older, and especially during this COVID time early on. I'm like, Paul, you okay? You safe? Are you are you doing okay? Do you need anything? I know I'm in Chicago, but can I help you in any way? So I love talking to Paul. In fact, we're going to do a Word Balloon podcast coming up in a few weeks.
Oh, okay.
Showed this videotape of Julie Schwartz's presentation from 1988. And let me say right off the bat, I know Julie as a person is problematic. That said, you can't deny. I mean, Julie Schwartz was part of DC Comics.
Yes.
From literally its beginnings till he passed away. He was still part of the company in a small way, even as a publisher emeritus or whatever his title was. And he knew all the great stories of the creation of Superman.
Yes.
So we showed this videotape, and we'll show it again on Word Balloon. I just to show the panel itself, the video would be all washed out, and you couldn't see it. It'd be better for us to show it. And then do something before and after it on a Word Balloon Live and let people ask Paul questions about it and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I love these guys. No, they're great guys, and I'm glad that I've become as friends as much as our contemporaries like Bendis and Rucka and Fraction, as much with the old timers. It's been a privilege.
So, All right, so John, it's already at the bottom of it's 10:30 in Hawaii time. I'm going to start wrapping it up. So I'm going to let like I said, our new listeners and even our older listeners, please check out Word Balloon, especially, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, because you created Word Balloon to like for these legendary creators, like to be remembered, like the late Denny O'Neil, the late Marty Pascal, to still hear their words, because like you said, Marty was from the mid 70s. Denny's been from the early
60s,
late
60s, 10 years earlier. Yeah.
And I've listened to I still have to listen to the Marty Pascal ones, but I've listened to the Denny O'Neil interviews, and they're great. I mean, he just bears his soul.
Yeah. Well, again, it's fortunate timing on my part, being the voracious reader that I am and having that kind of Rain Man sort of memory for all this stuff. It's buried in my head. I can't tell you how to bounce my checkbook, but I remember, my first Denny O'Neil stories and my first Neil Adams stories and Marty Pasco. That was a real privilege to be able to be there. Gene Colan is another one who's passed.
Yes.
Mike Wieringo, for that matter, a modern guy who was so important to me early on and really was one of my mentors in terms of, you're a great creator. What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? In terms of, as a guest, how would you like to be treated? Am I asking any stupid questions? Whatever. Honestly, the intent of Word Balloon was to generate interview style recordings of myself that I could send to prospective broadcast jobs and hope to get a talk show. And, lean on when I was talking to Walt Simonson about his Star Wars comics, because that would hook them in more so than the fact that he's such a great Thor writer or, everything else that he worked on in his career, Batman for that matter. And then it became its own thing. And by the time of when the producers of Prophets of Science Fiction from the Discovery Channel came to me and said, we want you to be an on-air expert. And it's like, they're not doing that because I'm a radio person. They're doing that because of Word Balloon. That's kind of was my aha moment, beyond the nice feedback I'd get from fans and creators that like what I'm doing. It's like, okay, these guys are making television shows and they're coming to me because they listen and watch Word Balloon. And man, so many screenwriters and producers of animation and live TV and film, through my other friends, actors and other comic book people that have graduated to the film and television world. And they'll be like, you would not believe how many people on my crew love and listen to Word Balloon. Or when Bendis went to do Seth Meyers and was getting the pre-interview, and they're literally like, on Word Balloon, you said ... And I'm like, all right, Seth Meyers writers are listening to me. And maybe Seth. I have no idea if Seth knows who I am. But that's the other great. Or when I met J. Michael Straczynski, and unfortunately it was a negative experience, but thankfully 10 years later we had a great experience. But he met me, and I'm like, hey, I don't know if you know who I am. I'm John Siuntres. I do Word Balloon. It's like, I know who you are. Because I wasn't a fan of his Superman, and especially when he walked off of Superman.
Oh, yes, I remember.
And he's like, I'll never do your podcast. And I'm like, oh, shit. All right. Well, I still love Babylon 5. It's cool. Yeah. And I do still love Babylon 5. I adore Babylon 5. I'm glad it's on HBO Max. And then when he came out with his autobiography, his PR people are like, hey, Joe Straczynski would love to do a conversation with you. And I'm like, if Joe wants to talk to me, I'm all for it. I'm like, maybe he doesn't remember. Maybe I'm an idiot mentioning it now to you. And maybe he's hey, I remember that guy. Fuck that guy. But we had a great 90-minute talk. And, man, he was so nice. And, again, I was ready. Because I knew everything about him, not only Babylon 5 and all his comics, but Real Ghostbusters, the cartoon, and him working on the 80s Twilight Zone, shit like that. And it was great. And he was even on an audio drama that I adored. It only lasted for 1 year. It was called Alien Worlds. And you can find it online, and there's like even a YouTube of all the audios of it. And it was coming out of Star Wars. And it was a spaceship going to alien planets, and most of the shows were two-parters. And he wrote a solo episode of it in 1979. I mean, it's one of the first jobs that he got paid for. And I'm like, tell me about Alien Worlds. He's like, oh, I'm glad you know that thing. And I'm like, yeah, man. I go, I love that show. So, no, he was great. But, yeah, I mean, again, I'm very, very lucky.
Mhm.
So, but my initial intent was, like I said, generating stuff for broadcasting because I wasn't getting the sports interviews that I was because I was working behind the scenes
Yes.
at Sporting News Radio at this point. They'd let me do boxing every now and then.
Mhm.
That was pretty much it. And even that, there was some resistance from the programmers and stuff, which I was like, fuck you. I know more than you'll ever know about this sport. But anyway, well, I did. I wrote for Ring Magazine. I wrote for Boxing Illustrated. So, again, it's whatever. I mean, my immediate boss, I made commercials and I did production features back then. And the Jack Johnson, Ken Burns documentary on PBS was on American Masters or American Experience. And the local public television station came in to film me to talk about Jack Johnson because Johnson, a lot of his history was happening in Chicago, and I was able to talk about that. And the program director, who hated me, and is like, I don't know, I've never heard of you, and you're supposed to be some sort of boxing expert. And he goes, I was working in Las Vegas, the boxing capital of the world, and I've never heard of you. And I'm like, this jerk has the nerve to tell me that. So I'm like, all right, the gloves are off. I'm like, well, during that time, I've been working in Chicago, the third largest broadcast market in the country, and I've never heard of you.
Yeah.
Now what? And he's like, how dare you? And I'm like, well, you just insulted me.
Yeah.
I thought it was okay to insult back.
Yes.
I thought we were going to have a nice conversation, but you're being a cock. So we never got along. And anyway, and so then when public television came in to videotape me, he and another host are like, why are they talking to Siuntres? I don't understand why they're talking to Siuntres. And my manager, who ran the production department that I was in, is in his very smoky voice I won't do the voice, but he's like, because everyone in broadcasting in this town knows that John is a real expert. And he said, it's okay that you guys are from out of town and you don't know, but what does this guy have to do to prove himself to you? He's written for Ring Magazine and Boxing Illustrated. When they were making Cinderella Man, I was considered for a technical advisor on the movie. I didn't get the gig, but they did say you're in the running. And by the way, the guy who got it was Angelo Dundee, Muhammad Ali's former trainer and manager. So they got a great guy.
Yes.
But because I made an audio documentary of a Jack Dempsey Gene Tunney fight, and it caught wind, and someone in development for Ron Howard is like, hey, maybe we should talk to this guy.
Yeah, that's
fantastic. And again, even to this day, I'm not don't you know who I am, because I'm nobody, man. I'm a pimple on the ass of geek culture. Fine, whatever. But if you actually do look at my track record, it's like, I don't know how to break it to you, but I have been in this business for 30 years in terms of broadcasting. And I've been doing Word Balloon for 16 years. So, yeah, maybe in some circles, I'm not asking for anything more than common respect. And those guys weren't doing it. So, but yeah, I was just trying to generate more interview tape with Word Balloon. And instead, it's become its own thing. So again, back to Rocky Balboa. Nobody's laughing anymore.
Yeah. So, all right, John, I'm going to wrap it up.
All right, buddy.
John, just thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, we have listened to one of the original Mercury astronauts of podcasting. I'm going to make you laugh because I'm the Jeff Bezos passenger in the phallic shape rocket.
But you made it to space. That's the key. You made it to space. So we've all made it to space. We're all right. I always think of myself. I was Gordon Cooper. I'd like to say because I wasn't the first, but I was one of the more colorful ones. So there you go.
All right. So, John, I know Word Balloon is still going on strong. I want to wish you continued success. I encourage new listeners to check out Word Balloon, and please check out John's past interviews. As I mentioned before, if you get a chance, check out the interviews from late legendary writers like Daniel O'Neill, Marty Pasco. So, also too, John, if we have, if you don't mind, can we do a part 2 too?
Oh, it'd be my pleasure, man. Truly, like I said, I mean, I saw your outline of questions and I tried to acknowledge some of them. But if you want to get more granular in terms of deeper into what comics I like or whatever, I'm happy to talk more, Jason. Now, you're a good guy. And truly, thank you for your support, both as a Patreon patron and a League of Word Balloon listeners member, but also the wonderful care packages from Hawaii. Those are incredibly kind and always such a lovely Christmas time gift. So I thank you so much.
No, and John, because I send those to you because It's just to say, my way to say thank you for doing Word Balloon. All your hard work is just something small. It's just say thank you. Just thank you very much.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for talking to me today. We had fun, and thanks for all the support. Everybody who listens, everyone who is listening that already does listen to Word Balloon, thank you. And I hope this conversation inspires new listeners to come and check out what I do at wordballoon.com and on my Word Balloon YouTube channel. All you got to do is search for Word Balloon, and you'll find me.
All right. And then lastly, I want to, thank you, the listen. Actually, before I finish up, again, John, thank you for your time. And I want to thank you, the listeners, for your time and listening to this episode. Until next time, guys, aloha.
Mahalo. Aloha.
Before I start wrapping things up, I just want to, apologize to you listeners. I'm sorry. I know in the first minute there is some type of radio frequency that got locked into our internet connection when I was talking to John Siuntres. I know it only lasts for a few seconds, so I apologize for that. I just thank God it wasn't all throughout the interview. So again, my apologies to you, the listeners who listen to this episode. All I can say is it was great. Other than that, it was great talking to John Siuntres of Word Balloon. I had so much fun talking to John about his early days of podcasting, and our love for Star Trek. So, that was great. So if you guys get a chance, please check out the latest episodes of Word Balloon. Like I said, it's a great conversation show. It really is. And also, if you are a new listener to the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast, please check out their weekly episodes that comes out every Saturday. Drew and Kyle do spec picks of new releases that comes out every Tuesday and Wednesday. So, please, check out new episodes. And again, like I said, check out new episodes of Word Balloon as well. Now, I want to give a few thank yous. Thank yous. First off, I want to thank John Siuntres of Word Balloon. John, thank you very much for coming on the show. Thank you very much. Like I said, it was great talking to you. It really was. And I also want to thank Drew, the Comics for Fun and Profit co-host. Drew, thank you very much for letting me contribute to your podcast. Thank you very much for doing all the heavy lifting behind the scenes in putting this episode together. Drew, thank you very much. And finally, I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, guys, aloha.